The time is now 5:34 p.m. on Wednesday, October 15th, 2025, and this public meeting of the DC State Board of Education will come to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Director Butler, please call the roll.
Representative Chamberlain,
Present.
Representative Dinkins,
Present.
Representative Mozendal,
Present.
Representative Wateree,
Present.
Representative Best,
Present.
Representative Chang,
Present.
Representative Colson,
Present.
Representative Goulet,
Here.
Representative Henderson,
Present.
Representative Johnson Law, Representative Thompson, Vice President Williams,
Present.
President Patterson. Mr. Vice President, you have quorum.
Thank you, Director Butler. A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will now proceed with the business portion of our meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay. Seeing no corrections, is there a motion to adopt this agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I will ask for the yeas and nays on the motion to adopt the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. We will now have the minutes from our October working session, which was held on September 30th due to Yom Kippur. Is there a motion to adopt these minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, the motion is to adopt the minutes from our October working session. I will now ask for the yeas and nays on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Good evening. I am Ben Williams, the Ward 1 representative and vice president of the DC State Board of Education. On behalf of the State Board of Education, I want to welcome guests and members of the public, including those who are watching live via the District Knowledge Network, to our public meeting. These meetings take place on the third Wednesday of each month in the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. Over the past month, the State Board has been working on our strategic priorities, which we started drafting during our fall retreat. We are excited to share those with you in November. We've also had meetings with Deputy Mayor Paul Kine and Dr. Mitchell, during which we shared updates and discussed ongoing areas of collaboration. Several members and staff will be attending the annual conference of the National Association of State Boards of Education later this month, which we are looking forward to. This evening, we have 11 public witnesses who have signed up to share testimony. We encourage the public to sign up every month at sboe.dc.gov. The State Board is available as a resource for our local communities. Please don't hesitate to contact your ward representative with questions or concerns related to public education, or to email our agency staff at sboe@dc.gov. At this time, I would like to welcome Tanika Miller, the Chief of Staff from OSSI, for OSSI's remarks.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I would like to bring remarks from Dr. Mitchell. I see some of you in the room. So some of you may know the DC Council is holding a hearing right now on chronic absenteeism and truancy, and Dr. Mitchell is there testifying. So I bring you her remarks. Thank you, President Patterson. It is great to be with the State Board of Education this evening. I always appreciate the opportunity to share remarks with the board and the public on OSSI's work and our shared priorities, such as attendance, expanded CTE opportunities, and statewide assessments. We recently published final attendance data for school year 24-25, and it showed that student attendance remained consistent with the 2023-2024 school year. While DC has reduced chronic absenteeism by more than 17% since the 21-22 school year, and profound absenteeism declined last year, we still have far too many students missing far too many days of school, especially in high school, and we need to continue to push for improved daily student attendance. As I shared with Council this afternoon, OSSI plays a unique and important role in supporting strong attendance in the district. OSSI works in partnership with the State Board to set meaningful minimum standards for student attendance and intervention and establish engaging, challenging, and culturally relevant learning state academic standards. OSSI also provides targeted investments and supports, including through a community of practice for our lowest performing schools, an attendance-focused grant program, and a district-wide school climate survey. Finally, OSSI plays a role in messaging the importance of student attendance. I will take this opportunity to reinforce this last point, especially for any parents or guardians that may be listening. Daily school attendance is incredibly important. Research shows that students with poor attendance records are more likely to struggle academically, have poor social emotional development, drop out from high school, and become involved in the criminal justice system. Every day of school matters because every single day students learn new academic content, deepen their relationships with their peers and teachers, and build habits that will support them to succeed in school and life. I urge everyone to continue to strive for strong daily school attendance this school year and beyond. One OSSI-led practice that has been proven to positively impact student attendance is the Advanced Technical Center, commonly called the ATC. In 2023, we found that students who took classes at the ATC had in-seat attendance rates nearly 7 percentage points higher in their regular high schools than similar school students who did not take classes at the ATC. In early October, we launched a new ATC program in Ward 8. Thank you, Rep. Johnson Law and President Patterson for joining us at this important unveiling. The ATC model provides high school students from across the city the chance to earn industry credentials and college credits, complete paid internships, and gain in-field experience. The Ward 8 ATC will specifically help schoolers gain hands-on apprenticeships in high-growth healthcare careers like nursing, patient care, and emergency medical first response. This is an exciting new program that will provide district students with direct on-ramps to well-paying careers right here in the district. Finally, I have an exciting announcement about DC CAPE, our statewide assessments. On October 3rd, we announced that we are joining the Smarter Balance Consortium as we transition to CAPE 2.0 in the 2026-27 school year. The transition to DC CAPE 2.0 reflects the district's ongoing commitment to high-quality, sustainable statewide assessments that meet the needs of DC students and educators. We made the decision to join the Smarter Balance Consortium based on feedback we received from LEAs on their priorities for the next generation of assessments. The updated assessment system will come with many benefits to district students and educators. These include having reduced testing time, a computer adaptive design for a tailored, accessible testing experience, enhanced accessibility features and accommodations, and additional instructional resources and aligned interim assessments that will help teachers accelerate learning. We look forward to providing the board with more information about this exciting transition and the benefits of CAPE 2.0 at our upcoming working session. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller, and OSSI for your work. We will now move to our expert panel on victim-centered restorative justice. As a reminder, the purpose of our expert panels is to inform state board members on a specific topic related to public education. We welcome a wide range of perspectives on each topic so we can use the information to take united action as a board. I will now call each panelist. Panelists, when I call your name, if you are here in person, please come up to the table. Dr. Justin Allen, Assistant Professor, Educational Psychology at Texas A&M University. Megan Challenger, Director of Legal Services, Volare. Nancy Descheno, Research Senior Manager at EdTrust. Yazid Jackson, Director of Restorative DC. And Nadia Pope, the Education Justice Attorney at Advocates for Justice for Education. All right. Panelists, thank you for being here with us tonight. Each of you will have 5 minutes to share your testimony, and then we will move on to one round of questions from the State Board. Dr. Allen, we will begin with you. Please begin when you are ready.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
There we go. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to contribute to today's panel on centering victims of school responses to harassment and bullying while meeting federal requirements such as the Manifestation Determination Review. My name is Justin Allen, and I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at Texas A&M University. My research focuses on decision making in MDRs and how these processes shape the experiences of students, families, and school systems. To prepare for today's meetings, I've tailored my written testimony to the guiding questions previously provided, although due to time constraints, my oral testimony will only highlight selected questions. Regarding the question, what should leaders know about centering victims when restorative practices are used? Leaders should know that while restorative practices are a promising approach to reintegrating the offending student into their community, the MDR and restorative processes should be kept procedurally distinct. The MDR is a legal determination about disability-related causation and IEP implementation. Blending it with restorative dialogues risks contaminating the legal analysis with non-evidentiary considerations and the
Dr. Allen, can you still hear us? All right. We seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties with the audio. So once we get that figured out, I will return the time to you and we'll move on while we'll get that figured out. Sorry for the inconvenience. Ms. Chandra, can we, once we get the sound taken care of, we'll start again with you.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Actually, Ms. Chandra, sorry to interrupt you. One more second. Can we restart the time to 5 minutes so to give her full time? Thank you. Yeah, you can begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So yes, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. My name is Megan Tallender. I serve as the Director of Legal Services at Volare. Since 2012, Volare has supported over 12,000 crime victims and survivors in the district through free, trauma-informed legal advocacy and therapeutic services. Volare represents victims of all crime in the district in protection orders, anti-stalking orders, and in asserting their criminal victims' rights. I want to focus on several of our programs that are particularly relevant to my testimony here today. First, Volare has a dedicated youth services program that serves survivors of crime ages 13 to 24. This program is a legacy of the organization Break the Cycle, which closed its doors in 2021. Relevant to today's conversation, at Volare, we provide no-cost legal representation to student survivors ages 13 plus in Title IX proceedings at secondary schools and universities in D.C. At the secondary school level, Title IX proceedings often look more like an intensive mediation process than traditional litigation. It is about maintaining the student survivor's right to equally access education despite the crime that they've experienced, while also recognizing the right of the student accused of harm to an education. In addition to representation for student survivors, Volare also provides prevention education in DC public schools on healthy relationships and consent through an MOA with DCPS. Finally, Volare is a restorative justice provider in DC. Restorative justice is often a good fit for survivors interested in alternatives to the traditional legal system. We know that every survivor's path to healing, safety, and justice is quite unique. So we offer both traditional litigation as well as alternatives such as mediation, negotiation, and restorative justice. The DC Youth Risk Behavior Survey informs us that 1 in 10 DC middle and high school students have been physically hurt on purpose by an intimate partner in the prior 12 months. And a similar number of students were forced to have sex when they did not want to. Youth who experience violence are experiencing developmental trauma and more likely to feel unsafe and skip school. So, unsurprisingly, high school students who experience abuse are twice as likely as other students to have grades of mostly D's and F's. Failing to finish high school has lifelong economic and health consequences. Technology-facilitated abuse is persistent and pervasive. The impacts of technology-facilitated abuse are significant, causing mental health and financial issues for many youth. It's critical to ensure that school policies address all forms of technology-facilitated abuse, including non-consensual image sharing, and also addressing the use of artificial intelligence-generated images, which many policies omit because of its newness. Intervention by schools to make sure that student survivors of all forms of abuse maintain access to their education through supportive measures and safety planning is critical to the student survivors' long-term health and well-being. When students opt for restorative justice after experiencing harm, it's critical to center the survivor of crime in that process. This means making the process entirely voluntary and allowing the student survivor to set rules for their participation that will ensure their safety. This should certainly mean that they can take breaks and end the session at any time, but it also might mean having other ways to express that they're experiencing stress or implementing rules for conduct during the session. These might include an agreement not to discuss certain sensitive topics or to include an advocate or support person in the session who's focused solely on the survivor's well-being. Wherever possible, survivor choice in the restorative justice process is crucial, not imposed rules or forced processes. It's also really critical to develop strong community partnerships with external organizations like Volare and my fellow panelists who can offer restorative justice as trained, objective third parties. Using school staff or administrators will potentially create power dynamics that prevent candor and openness. After experiencing dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, schools are required to provide supportive measures under Title IX to maintain the students' equal access to education. These supportive measures should be survivor-centered, and the burden of any supportive measures should not be placed on the survivor. Wherever possible, a typical day-to-day experience should be maintained for the victim, with safety measures put into place wherever possible. Additionally, we encourage schools to train their staff on trauma-informed language and assistance. For example, making sure that the survivor is only asked needed questions and reducing the need for retelling. Focus on the survivor's safety and emotional needs. It's also important to recognize that the impact of trauma often means that student survivors may present with new mental health concerns, such as anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress, and these changes may require a 504 or IEP. Focusing on survivor needs and recognizing the myriad impacts that a survivor experiences after trauma will help student survivors recover safely and successfully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Duchesneau.
Thank you. Members of the State Board of Education, good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm Nancy Duchesneau, and I serve as Senior P-12 Research Manager for the Education Trust, or Ed Trust for short, here in Washington, D.C. And I'm honored to be here to share testimony with you on best practices and supports in addressing conflict in schools. This is an issue that is of great concern for parents, educators, and of course the students themselves who experience conflict. And I'm grateful to you all for making this conversation a priority. Since its founding, Ed Trust has had the mission of closing opportunity gaps for students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. While ensuring all students have access to rigorous academic experiences is at the core of Ed Trust's work, we also recognize that the learning environment is key to student success and well-being. We all want students to experience schools that are safe, that support academic and holistic development, and that support a sense of belonging. Unfortunately, students do not always experience such learning environments. Students of color and students from low-income backgrounds are especially less likely to experience a positive school climate and are more likely to experience harmful practices and policies within their schools that don't provide opportunities to learn and grow from conflict, that make them feel less safe, and that exclude them. These harmful practices are rooted in fear and control. Fear for students' safety, and a deep desire to control the environment by removing or punishing behavior that causes conflict. However, when we examine how and when violence occurs in schools, the research is clear that it is often the result of a grievance that continues to escalate until violence occurs. Policies and practices that narrowly focus on what to do with a student once they have already caused harm to another student fail to address the root causes. Exclusion, for example, does not create safer schools. It does not support students in learning how to resolve conflict and does not hold students accountable for repairing the harm they cause. Instead, it is the result of a failure of the system to support and protect students and should be an absolute last resort, only taken when all resources have been exhausted and the safety or well-being of a child is at risk. To create learning environments where all children can thrive, we need to redirect our efforts from exclusion to approaches focused on building positive relationships, supporting student well-being, explicitly teaching conflict resolution, and accountability that leads to social and emotional development. This means wraparound supports that support students' health and well-being, a school culture that is rooted in restorative practices, and targeted supports provided by trained staff when conflicts occur. It means ensuring the school psychologist to student ratio doesn't exceed the maximum recommendation of one school psychologist for every 500 to 700 students, according to the National Association of School Psychologists. And again, that's the absolute maximum. And ensuring that they are focused on their core function of supporting students' mental health and academic success, not administrative tasks that are unrelated to their primary roles. It also means providing digital literacy to students about staying safe online, the ramifications and impacts of cyberbullying, and where to seek support. By focusing on relationships, skills, and adequate staffing, we can prevent grievances from escalating and equip students with the tools to connect with each other in healthy ways, ultimately ensuring safer schools. Thank you for allowing me to share this testimony with you today.
Thank you so much. Mr. Jackson.
Good evening, members of the State Board of Education. Thank you for including me to share my testimony. My name is Yazzie Jackson, and I am the Restorative Justice Director of School Talk, a DC-based nonprofit whose mission is to tackle the critical and complex problems that impact youth in the schools and systems that support them. School Talk's Restorative DC initiative promotes the integration of restorative justice philosophy and practices in DC school communities through professional development, training, workshops, targeted and whole school technical assistance, and monthly community of practice meetings. I appreciate the opportunity to come together today to discuss the power of harm. The first step actually isn't where the harm occurs, it's knowing that when there's community, there's harm. The restorative continuum is positioned to flexibly support and respond to actions of harm. Having a continuum of support allows for less emotionality and more structure and processes where humans have to navigate. The beauty of restorative justice is that it's not an offense-neutral approach, meaning regardless of whether the harm is committed by a fight in school, in-person bullying, cyberbullying, or something else, we do not create new processes or the framework. The process starts with proactive practices in the classroom and ends with transformative healing and justice. Many instances of harm in school setting can be mitigated through increased social-emotional learning, competencies, and a continuum of RJ practices for students and staff, which is why OSCE's SEL standards are so critical for our community. Additionally, multidisciplinary school teams must be set up and ready to wrap around students in conflict, which requires professional development, dedicated planning time, coaching, and clear processes and procedures. All elements of a school community RDC builds and serves through our technical assistance programming. Schools can use the RJ continuum that I shared with you all to develop plans, school-wide protocols, identify classroom management strategies, identify pathways to partnerships with families, and provide staff and student support before harm ever occurs. And when it does, the infrastructure is built for support, not punishment and avoidance. Once harm has occurred, the next step is language. At RDC, we do not use the term victim. We use first-person language, person who has experienced harm. This mitigates the compounding impact of negative identities for young people who are already labeled by systems and history. The next step is neutral reflection that honors the complicated reality that all parties likely experience harm. The following questions allow parties guided by school leadership to de-escalate, re-engage their prefrontal cortex, which naturally turns off during traumatic experiences and conflict. So here I presented some of the questions that are asked during this process. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected in what way? How could things have been done differently? And what do you think needs to happen? These questions kick off the process of healing and understand which students, instead of unilaterally punishing or disciplining without understanding, jumping straight to removal exacerbates harm by creating a fracture in the school community. Students need supportive adults that help them balance healing and self-protection by holding a high bar for all parties to stay safely engaged, build resilience, and resist the natural isolation that can occur after harmful experiences. Transformational healing occurs when you transform pain into purpose, go beyond trauma to repair relationships, and address root causes of conflict. These are skills that have lifelong impacts on students, and not engaging in this process can create lifelong habits of avoidance and eternal compounding of unhealed experience. We must ask ourselves what kind of future adults are we creating? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Pope.
Good evening. My name is Nadia Pope. I'm a staff attorney at Advocates for Justice and Education. AJE provides free legal representation to families in the district on matters related to special education, school discipline, safety, and other education equity issues. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide testimony today on the important topic of how we can truly center student victims within restorative justice practices, particularly in situations involving bullying or harassment. As part of AJE's mission, we advocate for equitable access to education and challenge the overuse of exclusionary discipline and other school push-out practices that disproportionately impact vulnerable students. Accordingly, my goal today is to provide some color to this important conversation by highlighting the inequities in current systems while offering practical ways to prioritize both safety and fairness for all students. When I was invited to this panel, I reviewed the session description, which states panelists will provide ways schools and local education agencies, LEAs, can meet federal and state requirements like manifestation determination reviews, while ensuring burdens such as transferring to a new school are not shifted to the recipient of serious incidences of harassment and bullying. While well-intended, this framing is concerning as it could be interpreted to imply that legal protections like MDRs are somehow an obstacle to victim-centered approaches, which misunderstands the purpose of these safeguards. I want to be clear that, for the record, the MDRs are not meant to excuse harm. Rather, they ensure that students with disabilities are not punished for behaviors caused by their disabilities, especially when schools have failed to provide the supports required by a student's individualized education program, i.e. an IEP. MDRs are accountability tools. They prompt schools to ask two key questions. One, was the behavior caused by or did it have a direct and substantial relationship to the student's disability? Two, was the conduct a direct result of the school's failure to implement the student's IEP? If the answer to either is yes, then the student's behavior is considered a manifestation of their disability, and exclusionary discipline that would change their placement cannot proceed. Instead, the IEP team should review and revise the student's behavioral intervention plan or conduct a functional behavior assessment to provide meaningful interventions. This process ensures that students with disabilities are held accountable in a way that supports their goal, rather than through exclusionary discipline that ignores the root causes of their behavior. Importantly, manifestation determination reviews are not appropriate settings to address the needs or experiences of the victim. Those important conversations should occur in a separate, intentional spaces specifically designed to support the student who was harmed. That is, MDRs do not have to occur in isolation. Schools can and should hold MDRs alongside restorative or support-focused meetings that center the victim's needs. Coordinating these processes within a close time frame may actually benefit all parties, especially the student with a disability, by helping them draw a clearer connection between their actions and the impact of those actions have on others. The goal should be to make school environments safer and more supportive for all students, even those who have caused harm. That does not mean a lack of accountability. It means recognizing that exclusionary discipline alone does not solve the problem. It often just moves it elsewhere. To truly center victims, we need intentional, structured processes that recognize harm and promote healing without abandoning our legal or moral obligations to students who struggle with behavior or other issues. The following are best practices that, if implemented, can help schools support all students involved in incidences of bullying and harassment. One, immediate intervention and communication. Schools must respond promptly to bullying or harassment concerns. Immediate communication with involved families helps ensure that all parties feel heard, informed, and supported from the outset. Two, trained neutral facilitators for restorative justice circles. Restorative justice practices must be led by staff who are trained, neutral, and trusted by the victim and the student who caused harm. Unfortunately, I've witnessed circles facilitated by school disciplinarians who are not adequately trained in restorative practices. This often creates a hostile or uncomfortable environment for both parties, undermining the purpose of the process. In several cases, schools have convened circles without reviewing the foundational principles of restorative justice and question why students fail to follow those guidelines. Without proper training and preparation, restorative circles will not yield meaningful healing. Three is dedicated time for victims to be heard. Victims must have the opportunity to share their experiences without interruption before any resolution can be met. Four, ongoing check-ins after restorative processes. Both the victim and the student who caused harm need ongoing support after a restorative circle. These follow-ups are critical to ensure agreements are upheld and that both students feel safe and supported. Number five is comprehensive
Pope,
safety plans that
thank you
embrace
so
the
much.
pattern and tracking behavior analysis, but not policing.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll look forward to following up with you during questions. Dr. Allen, thank you for bearing with us as we figure out the technical issues. Are you still there? And I see your box on the screen now. Thank you. Yeah, we're gonna start your time over and have you start over just so we can give you a coherent chance to share your testimony with us. We currently have you muted, so let's get that figured out. We cannot hear you currently. Bear with us just a moment.
Anything you can hear?
Great, we can hear you now. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again for having me and for being so patient, having me or inviting me to the panel today. This is obviously an important topic, and I'm happy to be here. As I was saying earlier, my name is Justin Allen, and I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at Texas A&M University. My research focuses on decision making in NDRs and how these processes shape the experiences of students, families, and school systems. To prepare for today's meetings, I tailored my written testimony to guiding questions that were previously provided. Although due to time constraints, my oral testimony is only going to highlight selected questions. So regarding the question, what should leaders know about centering victims when restorative practices are used? Leaders should know that while restorative practices are a promising approach to reintegrating the offending student into a community, the NDR and restorative processes should be kept procedurally distinct. The NDR is a legal determination about disability-related causation and IEP implementation. Blending it with restorative dialogues risks contaminating the legal analysis with non-evidentiary considerations and the subsequent biases that may accompany it. My work highlights the MDR as a high-stakes, ambiguity-prone decision that benefits from tight procedural boundaries and rigorous documentation. After the NDR decision, restorative options can be used to support victim safety, voice, and closure. Consequently, leaders should ensure separate timelines and teams, one for the MDR and one for restorative and safety planning. Regarding the second question, what challenges does your research show on balancing MDRs, the need for offending students, and IEPs and the needs of victims? While my research has primarily examined the decision-making quality, bias, and role clarity within MDRs, the broader literature highlights several interrelated challenges that emerge when schools try to balance the rights of students with disabilities with the needs of victims. First, system-level tensions often arise between compliance and safety imperatives. MDRs are rooted in IDA's requirement to protect students with disabilities from discriminatory discipline, whereas bullying and harassment statutes emphasize swift protective action for victims. Administrators and teachers frequently experience what is described as dual accountability pressures, which is a sense of being legally bound to uphold disability protections while also facing community or legal expectations to ensure immediate safety. Second, role ambiguity complicates implementation. School psychologists report being designated as the experts in NDRs without having consistent or comprehensive training in decision-making frameworks or bias mitigation strategies. When clarity is lacking, subjective factors such as sympathy for victims or perceived risk can unintentionally shape outcomes, particularly in emotionally charged cases. Taken together, the literature underscores that balancing victim protections with disability rights is not simply a procedural task, it is a systems level challenge that demands clear policy guidance, multidisciplinary training, and explicit separation between legal determinations and restorative or safety planning efforts. In response to the question, what does it mean to exhaust options before asking a victim to transfer? When students experience bullying or harassment, the goal should be to make their current school environment safe, supportive, and stable, not to move them elsewhere. In practice, this means that schools should take every reasonable step to restore a student's sense of safety and belonging. The district's duty is to remedy the hostile environment. My written testimony provides additional information, but in short, the measure of exhaustion is whether the school has fully used its internal systems to create a safe, inclusive environment where the student can remain and thrive. Only when a victim's family voluntarily requests a transfer and after documentation that every feasible effort to restore safety has been made, should a change in placement be considered. Even then, the district retains responsibility to correct the underlying conditions at the original site to prevent recurrence. And lastly, how can schools support school psychologists and other staff who must weigh victims' needs, the needs of students with IEPs? These concerns are best addressed by clearly defining professional roles and protecting practitioner independence. School psychologists are most effective when positioned as consultants within the MDR process, responsible for reviewing relevant evidence, documenting a transparent rationale, and advising the LEA and reaching a defensible conclusion. Positioning them in this capacity also protects schools when disputes arise. Hearing officers and courts often defer to well-documented professional judgments. Strengthen this safeguard, districts should provide targeted training on MDR decision-making, bias mitigation, and documentation standards. My research underscores both the critical importance of school psychologists' involvement in MDRs and the ongoing need to close training gaps that compromise consistency and procedural integrity. Finally, I want to thank the board for your leadership on this issue and the opportunity to contribute to the board's deliberation. I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ron. Thank you all. Members, I would also like to acknowledge and make you aware of written testimonies that we have received from Joe King at the Urban Institute and also Ashley Agbana at KIPP DC. We thank them as well for their testimonies. Director Butler will now call the round of member questions, which will begin with our new student representatives. Each member will have 3 minutes. A reminder to members that the 3 minutes include both the time to ask the question and the panelist's response.
Thank you. You will start with Representative Chamberlain.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for sharing your testimony. I appreciate you coming and talking to us. My first question would be for anyone who's familiar with DCPS's Chapter 25 policies. I'd like to know if, in an ideal world, if you could change anything about Chapter 25, and it can be multiple things, what would you change about the way that we, I don't want to say punish, but the way that we deal with unfavorable behaviors in DC's public school system?
Yeah, so one thing that I would change is that Chapter 25, I would like for it to line up with the Student Fair Access to School Amendment Act of 2018. Right now, the two are on completely separate tracks from each other. And so when you see students getting expelled through the involuntary transfer or the immediate involuntary transfer process, specifically the immediate involuntary transfer process, what the SUFASA, as it's colloquially known as, what that says that schools have to do and their obligations under the law look different than Chapter 25. One really great example is that under SUFASA, willful defiance is an area that you cannot suspend a student for. So willful defiance would be, I forget the exact definition that SUFASA uses for it, but it's basically when a student is not acquiescing or showing some sort of defiance or pushback to, known authority. SUFASA says you can't just suspend a student just because he or she is acting willfully defiant. But under Chapter 25, that's not a rule at all. And so you see a lot of schools suspending students for simply being willfully defiant in a situation. And when you bring that, or at least in my experience, when I bring that up to schools that SUFASA says this, I get looked at like either I have 3 heads or they dismiss it altogether. And so they continue to push the student out. And so you either have to go and file something with the courts or you have to continue to try and work on an administrative side to push for the school student to be pushed back into school. But the time that he missed or she missed is the time that they missed from school. So that would be one of the really big things that I would change about Chapter 25, is that it could actually line up with SBOE and what it says that the school's obligations are to students in disciplinary situations, because SBOE is much more comprehensive and it's much more restorative justice focused than Chapter 25 is.
Oh, if no one else has any thoughts, then I can move on. My second question would be, I'd like to know what you all consider grounds for exclusion. Gosh, W. Colson, can I help? Exclusion. Exclusion.
Thank you,
Who-
Representative
someone else
Chamberlain.
who-
The time is run out.
Okay, that's okay. What do you guys consider grounds for?
Representative Chamberlain, the
Is it
time is run out.
complete?
Representative Dinkins.
Thank you all for your testimonies. My first question is for Ms. Challender. Mentioning that trauma can impact learning outcomes and attendance, are there any specific early warning signs that teachers and administrators can look for, and how should schools respond to them?
Thank you for that question. I think that the early warning signs are similar to warning signs that you might see actually and anticipate for a 504 for anxiety or depression. So lack of focus, difficulty paying attention in class, not finishing assignments, feeling a sense that that they must check their phone all the time, which often is a teacher might be, frustrated with a student using their phone in class, but actually it could be because the student feels that because they're in an abusive relationship that they have to constantly be accountable to their abuser and say where I am, what I'm doing, how, and responding to their questions. And so actually phone use can be an indication of abuse. And so asking privately, not in front of others, why the attachment to the phone exists could be interesting and elucidating. Additionally, once there are outward signs of abuse like bruises or things like that, typically we're pretty far along in the path. So it's going to be looking more for those signs of power and control.
My second question is for anyone. What type of trauma-informed training would you say has the most impact for the educators, whether that's procedures, mindset, and how will its success be measured?
Amazing question. I'll take a quick stab at it and anybody else can jump in. One is training and capacity building for adults. What makes it complicated, many of our adults either have faced or are currently facing similar challenges that students may be facing. You mentioned mindset. Is the foundational element which allows for learning to happen for adults, especially if we expect them to be facilitators of healing and transformative healing and justice. And so the first step to me is really engaging with the adults and being able to work through their childhood traumas and ACEs so that they can be in a position to facilitate practices of healing and transformation.
Thank you so much.
That concludes our question.
Representative Mozamdar.
Hi, I wanted to thank you guys for coming and testifying today. My first question is for Dr. Allen and Ms. Pope. I feel like we've gotten kind of two separate ideas on the way in which MDR processes in restorative justice should be. I feel like both of you have mentioned that they should be kept somewhat separate, but I think Ms. Pope has also mentioned that there are times in which they should be kind of thought of together. So I'd like to hear both of y'all's thoughts on where you think the line should be between restorative justice approaches and MDRs as a process.
Sure, I'd like to defer and go second if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, sure. So MDR should be kept completely separate from the conversation around how the victim feels, what happened to the victim, the only conversation that should be included with the victim is if the victim is a part of the NDR meeting, like if that's their NDR, or if we're talking about strictly just the sanitary sacks of what led to the placement removal, which would lead to an NDR, then that can be included. I think in my testimony, when I talk about how having them in a close time frames, what I mean by that is having a restorative justice process happening closely or relatively close in time to when the MDR happens might be helpful, but I don't think that it's necessary to have those two. It might be helpful for a student who does struggle to understand societal like feedback to have those meetings around the same time as each other, because that might be a display of their actions and how they have consequences via the NDR and then additionally with the restorative practice as well, seeing how that person, how their actions make them feel as well. Having those two displays might be helpful. But I want to be clear that those two meetings should be completely separate from one another.
Yeah, I don't think there's much disagreement between us here. I think we're effectively saying the same thing, that keeping these processes distinct is important. From the NDR process, we have to, what my goal is always to do is to try to reduce bias as much as we possibly can. And then including restorative practices into the process can unintentionally increase biases that seep its way in. But the restorative practices could occur, either immediately before or immediately after, but just recognizing that the processes are procedurally distinct is the point that I was trying to make.
Thank you.
Representative Wari.
Hi, good afternoon. Mr. Jackson, I had a question for you, if I may ask it. How can schools ensure restorative processes aren't perceived as soft or harm, especially by victims and their families, while remaining in compliance with federal and state policies like manifestation determination reviews and a 30-day investigation deadline and 30-day investigation deadlines?
Yeah, oftentimes one of the myths in a lot of our training, we start off with myth busters around um, uh, the attitudes around restorative justice being a soft and permissive process. We start there because it gets the conversations going, and you kind of get to test the room to see where folks are in terms of their prior knowledge. A restorative justice process is not a singular decision around an incident. Restorative justice processes are a wraparound of not only student but also community, which includes families, students, other students, bystanders, other community members that may be outside of the school, the physical school building. The goal is to get to accountability. And in order to get to accountability, there's a set of skills that we must develop in a young person in order to get to that, the actualization of accountability. One is self-awareness. If the young person is not aware of the impact that they've had, then they can't be remorseful or accountable for their action. The second part is social awareness. They have to understand that their actions impact not only others, but spaces that they belong with. The third part is understanding how we all have a space of safety, and it's just not physical. So we're talking about intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and that we all have a responsibility to upkeep these levels of safety in order to increase the safety of the community. And so accountability is a long-lasting attempt and constant practice. And we do not want to create environments where there's a singular decision that is made that is supposed to influence a singular outcome. Knowing that many students that we serve have experienced multiple levels and his historical and generational trauma, a part of the process is getting to root causers and including families in addition to stakeholders to be a part of the process so they can have an environment for their own healing as well.
Thank you.
Representative Fest.
All right. So over the past few years, we have had a real bad youth crime and youth violence issue in DC, and I believe that our schools are also playing a part in that. The real world isn't going to care if a student has ADD or ODD. And I think that we often think that we're supporting them, but I fear that we're causing more harm by not teaching accountability. And we also need to take accountability for not always implementing these programs properly. We literally will have kids who say, "You can't do anything to me because I have a disability." Our kids aren't stupid; they know how to get around certain systems. And so I know that you all have said, like, if these programs aren't done properly, then then it doesn't work. And so my question to you is, like, how often do you see that it's actually implemented properly? And then if we are not implementing it properly, are we causing far more harm to our students than we would if we were not using them at all? Restorative justice.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that one of the things that is critical to restorative justice, in my mind, is that it is voluntary through the whole process, right? And so, if it becomes coerced or demanded, then it will not work. And it won't work for the victim, and it won't work for the person who caused harm. So it's really critical to have it be voluntary and a part of a choice. And I just do want to just slightly push back on the sort of beginning of the question, in the sense that in society, I wish that we would recognize the root causes of that lead to harm, right? I think that's important, and I don't think that either pushing students out of school or pushing people to jail is a good solution to any societal problem.
Right. I think I'm looking for, like, what is that balance, right? Because I don't know if we've necessarily found that yet in our schools.
If it's okay, I would like to speak for a second, simply just reiterate. Relates back to the points I was making earlier. If students are saying that you can't do anything to me because I have a disability, it signifies a profound misunderstanding of how these processes are supposed to work, and does indicate that staff require quite a bit of additional training in this area to remedy this. This shouldn't be saying this, putting the whole exclusionary stuff aside for a minute, which I largely disagree with. Schools have procedures in place that they can they can address these issues.
Yeah, just as someone who used to be a special education coordinator, I've seen people not implement it properly, and it's a challenge, and we have to admit it and acknowledge it.
Representative Fest and Representative Chang.
Mine is a implementation question too. Picking up on where you left off, Dr. Allen, in your written testimony, you wrote that at the bare minimum, every school should maintain immediate safety evaluation, confidential reporting, caregiver communication, mental health triage, as well as cyberbullying documentation and takedown protocols. And I read those and I think of the many different qualities in which that could be implemented, right? And so I'm curious, from your experience, how policies like those, how do we make sure that those policies are implemented well and not just checked off as a compliance list item? And what examples do you have of the policies being implemented well?
This is an excellent question. And I think whenever we're thinking about this, one of the ways that I actually encourage schools to think about this is, if you notice in the way I wrote that, I talked about basic components of this and then additional components. The basic components are meant to be just standard procedures that you could standardize and put in place. This is something that recommendations can be put in place by the state boards of education, for example. We can also follow best practices. NASP puts out quite a few best practices on these. And then the additional ones are ones that require ongoing individualized adjustment and judgment from the school practitioners. These include things like the behavioral threat assessment team, incorporating them, and working with the victims in here to provide additional support for them, so that we can reintegrate them, not just reintegrate them, but put them in a scenario, keep them as safe and comfortable feeling within their school environment as possible.
Is there a school system that's going well?
Is your school system works done well? I don't know. This is something that I think we would have to look to see what the research actually says within this particular area.
to the other witnesses and experts, is there a school system that you think we should be looking at that are modeling what you're naming is best practice?
I think there's some school districts that have modeled RJ implementation in pieces that have been done well. And believe it or not, DC is one of those places where implementation of restorative justice has been done well. There's areas like Chicago, Oakland, San Francisco, Denver, Houston, where there's elements that are really, really done well. And I think as emerging leads are entering communities, we always find challenges with every system.
Yeah.
And so I think as emerging needs and conflict arises, it also shifts the outcomes of a practice.
Yeah. With 5 seconds left, I'd love to make a note. It would be great if we could follow up with each of you on best practices and the context, and then also how to measure whether or not we're doing it well.
Thank you, Representative Chang. Representative Colson.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate everyone's testimony. I want to say thank you to my colleagues, Representative Best and Representative Chang, for asking those questions, because those are two that I can check off my list. If you all are not aware, it was a House bill that was approved for us to go in the direction of charging students, or children rather, who are 14 years old as adults for some crimes. With that framework in mind, I think that the school is asked to do a lot. And restorative justice, when implemented well, takes a lot of time. You all have already spoken to that. Let me get to my question. My question is, we've talked about what the school can do. We could talk about what the other supports in the school can do and what the law can do. Can someone please speak to me about accountability for parents? Because all of these things, the behavior, all of the things that we are seeing go back to parents. How can we hold parents accountable and not just the school system? So I would direct that to you first, because parent training is in the title of your organization. Thank you.
So I think first, to answer your question, I think parents are also, so Mr. Jackson spoke to capacity building. And that's an important part of ensuring that restorative justice is implemented properly at the school level. I think that parents also have limited capacity, especially right now when we look at the time that we're living in DC. The amount of over-policing and federalization of police, and the skyrocketing prices of everything from housing to egg to gas to anything, the amount of to bus fares and, your trips on the metro even being increased, and wonder if you're crowded at the Hamlet as well, right? The lack of employment, the list goes on and on. They have a lack of capacity as well. And so the reason why we place so much emphasis on providing resources to the schools is because that's the one space where we know we can capture a lot of students and give them these resources and tools, because I think that the society, we do understand and believe that it's not just the students that come from near-mid homes, that come from homes that are already instilling these behaviors and these traits and characteristics into them, that deserve to learn and being able to profit from being a positive member of society. But those students that are coming from tumultuous homes or homes that aren't the best as well, deserve that practice as well. So to hold parents accountable, we have to be providing them with the resources in order to have the capacity to be the best parent that they can be as well. They're hit with a capacity crisis as well. So that power would interact.
Thank you. Representative Goulet.
Thank you all for your testimony today. Yeah, I do agree we do have a crisis right now in our city. Our ombudsman reported for school year 23-24 that only 31% of our students, our public school students, feel safe throughout the school day, which is a horrific number. And, although I'm a fervent supporter of the goals of restorative practices, the number one complaint I get is bullying and violence in the schools. And this program is mentioned over and over again for how it treats victims of that. and it's coercion. It does feel coerced because the students feel they're being pressured into this program by administrators, and then being victimized again through the process. So, would any of you object to a requirement that a student who's a victim of bullying or harassment needs both student and parental permission before being approached to participate in restorative practices?
I would support that. I don't know if you're just looking to.
Yeah, no, I'm just, is there anybody who would object to requiring going forward parental permission for a student who's been subjected to bullying or harassment before administrators approach them about doing restorative practices?
It the literary and break it depend. I think depending on the area and the quantitative procedure, where it I be one type that all I can mention are dealing online that aren't the best, and the parents might not be able to provide it, or provide that support. So I think it's a learning that they see online.
Okay. If a school's best efforts, let's say, to try to solve a bullying situation are unsuccessful after multiple attempts to work with a student, is there any situation that would make sense for expulsion, for suspensions, prior to forcing the victim of the bullying to leave the school? To me, it seems like we have it backward. We're basically coming in talking about trying to expand victim transfers instead of saying if a student won't stop tormenting another student, they get expelled before the victim is forced to leave their school. Does anyone have a problem with that?
Yeah, I would strongly oppose that. I think, as my colleagues have all said, restorative justice at its foundation needs to be voluntary on the side of the victim. However, as another one of my colleagues has said as well, when you expel a student without having tried to support that student in learning the social and the emotional skills necessary to address the harm that they caused, all you are doing is sending that to another school where the same things will happen again. And so in order to support both the victim, the perpetrator, and like the entire community, what you really need to do is find ways to support the person who is causing harm, to understand what harm they are causing and how to behave in a different way.
And I'm not looking at one instance. I'm looking at repeated instances of this.
I thank you all for your testimony tonight. I'm going to open this to anyone, though it is a DC specific question. If you could just speak to where restorative justice fits in the broader landscape. And I'm thinking, for example, how many schools have a restorative justice program? How many of them are using a third party to do that? And I also struggle when I look at the disciplinary report from OSSI, I see that we still have nearly 10,000 suspensions. And so how does that fit in the context of a city that's has a restorative justice component? I don't know how big the component is.
So I can speak to that. Currently in DCPS, there are about 70 plus RJ coordinators up at DCPS. That percentage for the public charter schools, I have no idea in terms of like what is that percentage of RJ coordinators. In terms of number of schemes that Restorative VC supports, currently we're supporting roughly 45 to 47 schools with third-party technical assistance. That work is tracking data, also looking at incidents of harm that have led to suspension and that incidents that did not lead to suspension. And so you mentioned the 10,000, suspensions, and even looking at those trends and being a part of the discipline report. What we're also looking at is the number of supports that have been provided, and when some of these incidents are repetitive, we still have human decision making that is taking place. And the earlier question around capacity and skills of an adult, these are still adult decisions that are being made. And so being able to equip and skill not only through mindset, but through practical practices will lead to a decrease in suspensions because those are adult decisions.
So is Volar part of Restore DC, or is it independent?
We're in.
Okay, and do you happen to know like how many other third parties like yourself there are that are operating in the city?
Oh, I don't. Do you know? No.
Sorry.
Representative Johnson Law.
Thank you, everybody, for your testimony. I was on 2 different meetings. I was listening to you from the car. And apologies for my tardiness. We were dealing with one of our schools in an ice incident, so we had to support the families there. But either one of you can answer this. I thank a lot of you for talking about life, the manifestation reviews, kids with disabilities, IEPs, and 504s. My question is, when we talk about restorative practices, how does that play into people not even understanding how to do special education well in the first place? Because a lot of our schools have been struggling with all of this. And if we're talking about a child who is trying to regulate themselves, they're trying to regulate their emotions, they're trying to figure out things, there may be things going on at home. There's all these different things that are happening. And if we're not even implementing or baking in special education best practices with every single person in the building, how does this even relate to the restorative process or even accountability when the people who are supposed to be implementing it in the first place are struggling? Anyone can take this. Hi. Hi, Nadia.
Bullshit. So I think how it kind of sits in is that when you don't utilize the special education best practices, what you end up doing when a child is acting out or is having some issues is you're then shaming the student for their behaviors rather than understanding the core of why those actions are occurring. So then we can't get to the root cause of it, which then allows you to just continuously perpetuate this system, right? So we have functional behavior assessment, which my testimony talks about, which are really helpful to understanding the core, like the core reason why a student is acting the way they're acting in behavior, which helps you create a behavioral intervention plan, which helps you track the behavior.
But hold on, dear. You know that. I know that. It's called a BIP for everyone who's listening, BIP, but behavior intervention plan. But this is the trick. Everybody in the school needs to know that.
Yeah.
You have to bake in the best special education practices, period. And my question to all of you is, how do you do that from the get-go? Because if you haven't solved the root cause of all the issues, we're now dealing with it on the back end. And we haven't fixed what's the root cause. And I can give you all the rest of my time. I only have 38 seconds, sorry.
I'll be 20 seconds. One thing is that we're doing with a lot of schools with implementing restorative justice is making sure that we're functioning in MTSF, multi-service systems of support. This allows for us to isolate SPED and its best practices, and then also merge and implement restorative justice alongside of it without compromising the principles and the core values.
But do schools know how to do that? And do they know how to do it well across all of them? So, not all.
Thank you. Representative Thompson.
I'll follow up with you guys.
Good evening. I believe, Ms. Pope, you talked about alignment between Chapter 25 and I think my question, I'm trying to wrap my head around where else alignment is important. Because when I'm listening to this panel and I'm reading testimonies, including the ones that were submitted to us, it seems like school discipline is only part of the equation for minimizing harm. And I feel like we're having a lot of conversations around effective discipline, whether we fully implement restorative justice, whether that's supported. Doesn't matter the population of students, but I I think I'm curious for you all to talk about how that also relates to other components. What else needs to be aligned when we talk about things like school climate overall? When we talk about what it takes to have a safe and supportive environment, because if effective, in my opinion, effective school discipline policies, no matter what they call them, should have accountability to the overall expectations of the school climate. And so, could you talk about like the bigger picture for what it looks like to have a safe and supportive environment for young people, maybe even including some of the things around social emotional learning and giving young people the skills?
My answer will be very quick, which is I would encourage required, peer-reviewed, studied, healthy relationships and consent education, prevention education that gets ahead of the problem. So that you're not just dealing with it after the harm has occurred. So prevention education, and then also I don't support restorative justice as a be-all end-all for discipline, right? Because that would be coerced. So thinking also about the way that Title IX aligns with all of these policies, I think is critical, which is one thing that we haven't talked a ton about, but the reality of how you can make supportive measures assist a victim as well.
I'll just provide a couple of specific things. One is around family engagement policies and the practices that schools have, because again, restorative practices should include the community, including the parents and guardians of those youth. A second one is professional development for educators, making sure that they are not just trained in restorative practices, but in engagement and in an assortment of things that are all impactful in the school climate. And then I'm going to throw an odd one at you. Actually, making sure that you have culturally sustaining curriculum within your schools and teaching is also really crucial, because that impacts a sense of belonging for students, as well as seeing themselves in academics. So,
Thank you. Vice President Orton.
Thank you, Director Butler. Thank you all for your testimony. I'm in schools every day as a teacher as well. I teach in a high school, and I teach in the district for now 13 years, and I've seen restorative justice kind of implemented in all the schools with varying degrees of success. And one of the restorative justice coordinators that I've worked with would regularly say, you can't restore something that isn't there, and I think, and so that piece around what I've heard people talk about with lack of skills with adults, lack of mindsets with adults, lack of training with adults, like these are real realities that are implementing or that are impacting poor implementation in this tool that could be useful, but is having, less beneficial results because adults aren't trained and schools don't have systems, and we're not creating a positive school culture proactively. So in that context, I've heard from many of my colleagues around this idea of accountability, and I feel like victims would feel safer. I feel like teachers would feel safer. I feel like parents would feel clearer if they knew what accountability actually looked like at a practical level. So I've seen students cuss teachers out, not want to apologize, be put back in the classroom next period. That to me should not be happening. You know, students who, yes, if there's a physical altercation, a student should not necessarily be close to another student, and the whole school should be communicated about that situation so that they can monitor the safety of a student. And those practical guidelines I've seen consistently missing. So I'm just curious, because we've been talking a lot about theory, and I'm looking more about the practice and application of, are there real guidelines and realistic training implementation that can happen to make sure that we're promoting positive school culture, but also holding students accountable when egregious infractions happen, that don't result in expulsions and suspensions, but also create a real sense of consequence.
Yeah, great question. And where it starts is with relationships. You mentioned the RJ coordinator. Uh, I'm curious to know who it is, and that's one of the things that I say in my trainings. We can't restore something that doesn't exist. Um, and I, uh, we can't restore something that didn't already have value. And so when we're talking about school climate data and we're talking about a sense of belonging and the students don't feel like they belong, then what are we restoring? We're actually rebuilding. We're actually not at the process of restoring. In terms of practical steps of implementation, this work isn't a program or a project. This work is a philosophy that should be integrated as a process in all elements of your school day. And so school climate and culture data.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have to cut you off there too, and I just want to say like that I see that as like a support, not a substitution for how we should be doing this. Thank you.
President Patterson.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize to my peers, my colleagues, for not being there in person and for stepping in for me. I do have a question for Miss Pope. Miss Pope, we know each other because we had to work together on a particular situation. Without going into like this disclosure of that situation, I would like to ask you when we have a situation where an accusation has been made, um, and it results in an expulsion. What are some of the things that you think, after having that experience that you and I worked on, that should be changed to make sure that it is equitable as far as investigating, ensure that both sides of the accusation are considered and the harm that can be done?
Yeah. So yes, sorry. So first thing that comes to mind is we're gonna go back to alignments. The processes that take place during investigation did not match up with the timeline and the process of a media evaluation. So a media evaluation transferred with the expulsion process for DTCS. It allowed DTDS to expel students for state detention for validation. Those she was not provided under prosecuting guide. And so she could be expelled for an allegation of the harassment. And therefore they could get cleared during or anyone else to get that they complete their investigation. If you're an officer, you will go ahead and initiate without for full weight or all this information. And that is a read to one that wanted the police and for using cases that Ida Campbell, the authentication where app getting validated expelled the appeal, you can advocate the party full the coaching. If again found that is found no institution that the care she found no essentially is to that provision this. Then now we were using the cows in school and dirty the reception kind act peers of competent accommodating like a point based off of that your allergies. We get to pick the hat list like that, but the data. But if I heard bigger the theory proceed that way on theory, they have education with the I chili relate the outlet with the for aligning the property, but island it could be better coordinated to that the origin that by that right our theory that lead to the
I want to thank you first personally, but thank the whole panel for coming tonight. This information is invaluable, and I appreciate all the work that's being done by each of you.
Thank you. I'll now turn the meeting back over to our Vice President.
Thank you, Executive Director Butler. Thank you all so much for your testimony here tonight. We want to continue working with you to kind of bridge the gap as to what theory says and where we're at as in DC. So thank you for your thoughtful testimony and your time here tonight. The State Board will now recess for a short break. Members, we will return at 7 p.m. When we return, we will welcome our public witnesses. Public meeting and your comments become part of our official record. If you would like to speak at future public meetings, please sign up on our website at sboe.dc.gov or contact our staff by email at sboe@dc.gov or by phone at 202-741-0888. Sign up closes 48 hours before the public meeting. Tonight, we have 11 public witnesses who have signed up to share this evening. As a reminder, all public witnesses must share a copy of your testimony with our staff at SBOE@dc.gov so that we can add it to the public record. We will hear from those in attendance in a panel format. Each witness will have up to 3 minutes to provide comments. If you are with us in person, please note that you must use one of the microphones at the table, which are already on. After each panel concludes, we will pause for questions from State Board members. If members have questions for public witnesses, they will have up to 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes include their question, comment, and the panelist answer. Executive Director Butler will call the public witnesses in groups and announce the question rounds. She will also assist with timing to ensure our witnesses and members stay within their allotted time. Executive Director, please call the first round of witnesses.
Ashley Ruff, Laura Fuchs, Scott Goldsings, Allison Reese, Ange Perko, Andrea Trujillo, Cara Chiabone, Dominic Moore.
All right.
Or we'll start with blocked. What is it? Never belonging to get in prep help. They're constantly have to be more folded or carry more responsibility with pudding. They're walking away, some have good years on front of all this stuff. He's still over 7 vacancies in 17 positions and more of a than peak. The semester conceiving manifests entire inshipper by weekend and fairly low on movie butter. If confer quite the pain particularly poor and hope they depend wow. There are myriad of cards that are but one ringed out received that educators of no kind are their goal. And the policy choices being made in this district, choices that also need a greater instability, make our jobs harder. We have to be cognizant of what we're asking teachers and other educators to do when it comes to supporting our students. With educators, we recognize the importance that's on attendance. I was at their lessons at bringing IT, accounting for social local learning, providing final and quality feedback and more, better than any. It's incredibly hard to plan to scaffold your job, and students are constantly cycling in and out of our classroom. It's harder to do our jobs when there's 75 educational aid of the DZ Tech vacancies. It is harder to do our jobs when BCDS is constantly adding on initiatives and taking away heavily relied upon supports like goal books and brain tops without any warning. Very often, losing to chronic itchings also rely on demanding educators to do more, like make more phone calls, fill out more sheets, have more saving, get more remediation time, and that comb visit. But any additional times, BSO or left neither of the should more both. How to get different courses, requiring or adding ACID elective, and no additional funding, also more crap, and take more time. The WT contract does provide some warning loss and tentative period that are meant to carve out perfected content. In our last negotiated contract, WT and BCTS agreed to 4 days per week in the first 30 minutes of the day will belong to Peter. He's at 8.5. BCTS immediately went back on that and began taking additional days and shortly and refusing to compensate us to their con. They just lost an arbitration, but I already know that this is they have forced the to go to meetings again instead of getting them the time to plan. He has 225 minutes of per capita's individual led planning time to element 2 in one full period per day or secondary to plan grade do all the other casts or double fires. EDS is consistently taking the promise for mandated professional development data meetings and again with zero compensation, often additional work and deliverable. How you all can help. 1, ensure any future report card from OSCE does not have any label or grade or publicized associated tools, because that creates is accessing the data reading.
2, supplements are heavily on standardized tests. Claim reason. 3, encourage GTTS to work with the LSAT in school chapter advisory committees to discuss very often, alongside funding that we could use to forget Pradeep, and remind DTTS that you must abide by a contract if not violated.
Thank you. Scott Goldstein.
Good evening. The board centering the justice this
We cannot hear you, Scott. Hold one moment.
but I think there's an echo back to myself. Should I try again?
We will come back to you, Scott, and go to the next witness. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
I can hear you, but it's echoing still.
What is that?
Oh, okay. I was just like, I don't hear anything. Okay, we will go to the next speaker. Ange Perko.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Ange Perko. I'm an educator and community member from Ward 4 and a fellow with Empower Ed. My pronouns are they, them, and I would appreciate being referred to as just Perfo instead of Nisso or Misker Perfo, as I identify as a trans non-binary person. I presented earlier today at the DC Council on absenteeism, and what stood out to me was the stories of the people who already knew why the kids aren't showing up. New restricted travel routes mean their kids now have to take 2 buses just to get to their metro station because their family can't afford to live any closer to the school. Students failing their classes year after year because they couldn't get to school on time, and how this disproportionately affects our non-white students. Kids are routinely overwhelmed by the demands being made of them in and out of school. These kids, who at a first cursory glance might only be thought of as lazy troublemakers or some other such nonsense, are in fact fighting incredibly difficult circumstances, mostly outside of their control. Let me now tie this to restorative justice. Congress has been making movements on the national level to criminalize DC's use by lowering minimum age restrictions. Currency taken to its extent can be considered a misdemeanor at public. So now take this one step further, and it makes me wonder what will happen to routine offenders in future. And by that I mean it fills me with terror, particularly with how intent this administration is to criminalize certain populations, now including DCU. My thoughts go along these lines. Truancy is considered a crime, and our age limitations are lowering, so what's going to happen to our children? We have seen such a slippery slope we are already on right now. We can't fight back on a national level as much as being what we might want to on how our city's kids are treated. So we have to use every weapon at our disposal, and that means we have to fight cruelty with compassion. If you treat kids like criminals, they will act like criminals. Kids rise to the expectations set for them. I see it time and again in my classes, and they rise to my expectations because I care about them, and I make sure they know it. Now, this is not easy, not for anyone, not the teachers or parents or administrators or any of you here on the board trying to understand the policy changes that need to be made, or anyone who interacts with kids on the regular. But children are not easy, and they are not supposed to be. They are still developing. They are not supposed to be easy. Just because it's hard does not mean it's not worthwhile. Systematic inequality does not end overnight, and generational poverty doesn't vanish on its own. That's our responsibility, and in the meantime, we treat children like humans. The point of teaching is to include and nurture, not to shame and shun. Discipline is supposed to teach, not to control. Thank you for your time and consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Andrea.
Hello all. My name is Andrea Chidil. I am currently a portraiting physics teacher at La Localer, and I'm a fellow with Impellens. I'm a geek about discipline, which is another stressor that I put on, but it is another addition to why many leaves. Because not only are we expected to, come up with lessons, but we have behaviors that are challenging and that we need to manage. And
we are not provided the resources to implement appropriate behavior plan for students, especially students with special education, who are a majority of the discipline issues in schools, because they act out because they want to distract from, they don't want the peers to realize that they're not performing at their level. So they distract with behavior, goofing off. And it makes teaching incredibly difficult because it's hard to manage that and to motivate them. It's very hard to keep a student motivated when they keep, they're required to take all these assessments that keep telling them they're below grade level. I mean, after how many times do you see that, or how hard are you going to want to keep trying at it? And we don't have the staffing. Training is not provided to the entire school, as was stated earlier, for, behavior implementation. Staff doesn't know how to, approach or, what a kid's agreement is, what helps them focus. Maybe a kid just needs to walk and they don't realize that. So they, enter into a power struggle with them over something that didn't need to happen because they just needed to walk. And I know it sounds like a broken record because I'm saying this all the time, but we really need more resources in school to deal with discipline so that teachers can focus on teaching. We can't just let the kids, do whatever they want, but we don't focus, but we help in doing so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Clara.
Good evening. My name is Karen.
One moment. We have to reset the clock. I'm so sorry. You can go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Kara Chavone. I'm a high school English teacher in Ward 8, and I'm here because school discipline in BC isn't currently achieving its goal of creating a positive and productive school culture, and our students deserve a more effective solution. As teachers, we are expected to shoulder the immense burden of our ailing social safety net while also trying to educate our students. Many of my students can't focus on learning or complete homework due to the consequences of poverty, violence, or abuse that touch their lives. Sometimes these circumstances show up through a lack of focus or sleepiness in class, but other students react to these injustices through anger and violence, which often get them into trouble at school. The high school where I work is currently going through a period of excessive fighting. Our students are solving any and every interpersonal issue with a fight, putting other students and staff members in danger as a result. Many outsiders would tell my school's leadership that the solution is simple. Just suspend them. Just expel them. But this solution is too simplistic and punitive to solve the complex situation at hand. Students who fight as a solution to their problems can't just be excluded from school until they comply with the rules. Many students don't have the coping skills necessary to handle their problems in any other way. We see this when the same students get into fights over and over again, no matter how many times they're suspended. These students need therapy, behavior support, and trained faculty to teach them effective alternatives. Due to budget cuts, my school is more strapped for these behavior support resources than ever at the very time we need them most. The Student Fair Access to School Amendment Act, passed in 2018, limited schools' ability to suspend and expel students. And this was a positive thing, as suspensions and expulsions have been proven over and over again to disproportionately impact Black and Latina students and fuel the school-to-prison pipeline. SFASA was also intended to fund restorative justice programs, which would replace the antiquated system of over-reliance on suspensions and expulsions. And well-designed restorative justice programs really can make a revolutionary difference in school discipline, but they're time-consuming and expensive to implement and very rarely done well without proper investment. It's essential that we make the necessary investment to make these programs effective because our school culture depends on these supports. Unfortunately, SFASA was never fully funded, so schools were never able to reach the goal of effective restorative justice programs. OSSI was supposed to receive wide funding for technical assistance, school support, grant partnerships, additional staffing, professional development, all the things it takes to make restorative justice work. But at best, these resources have only been partially realized because we failed to fund this bill. Before we write off SFASA and restorative justice practices, we have to actually try and implement and resource them fully. And further solutions like community schools and added behavioral health programs will help address our school discipline problems far more than added punitive approaches. It's in the city's best interest, and it's the most supportive thing for our students to use the whole child approaches to school student behavior rather than ramp up the school to prison pipeline and continue to criminalize youth in our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dominique.
Good evening, board. My name is Dominique Moore. I'm the founder and executive director of a community-based organization called Life Rain, and I am the proud community organizer for Empower Ed. For 7 years, I've taught as a special education teacher in the districts. In each of these roles, what I have witnessed is that students respond to a deep sense of belonging or a lack thereof. It impacts their behavior, attendance, and academic success. When students feel seen, valued, and connected to their school community, they show up differently. Too often, conversations about student discipline focus on compliance and consequences rather than connection and care. This approach has not worked. It has only deepened the inequities and perpetrated the school to prison pipeline. Instead, we must invest in restorative approaches, social emotional supports, and community partnerships that help students build relationships, repair harm, and restore trust. One of my favorite ideologies or social sayings is educating the educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. So belonging doesn't end when the bell rings. It is built through safe, engaging, out-of-school time programs that connect young people to mentors, enrichment, and real-world learning. These programs provide structure, safety, and joy. To truly transform discipline and school climate, we must legislate and sustain these supports, not treat them as temporary add-ons. Stable funding for out-of-school time, community schools, and safe passage initiatives could be seen as core components of school discipline reform and student well-being. I urge the board to center belonging, support legislation, and policies that expand and stabilize out-of-school time programming, strengthening community-based partnerships, and prioritizing restorative justice, trauma-informed training, and culturally relevant learning experiences that make students feel both safe and inspired. And with my last 50 seconds, I was not able to testify last month, but I would like to bring up recommendation 6 for the graduation requirements. Although I think it is a great idea and program to roll out as a alternative diploma for our special needs students, we need to take a deeper look at that. I read it and the language is kind of ambiguous and unclear as what group of students we are certainly trying to address for this program. So as my recommendations, I would look at what classifications of students for special education are we looking at. As we know, DC has several different classification programs. We have CES, ILS, we have inclusion. What category of students would fit that model? It also says a lot about expanding the transition program. And as a 15-year special education teacher, the transition ideology and theory is great and practice non-existent. I am over 6 seconds, but I welcome the opportunity to talk to anybody else about recommendation 6, and thank you for your time.
Mr. Goldstein.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. It seems like there's no echo. All right. Good evening. I appreciate the board centering the topic of restorative justice this evening. The panel provided critical perspective, but tonight's theme of centering the victim more in restorative justice is framed in a way that shows a misunderstanding of what restorative justice is. It's not a system that is focused on the victim or the perpetrator. It is about community relationships as a whole, interconnectedness. We cannot pronounce this approach as failing or missing the mark if we're not willing to make the real shifts and have the conversations, like explaining to the parent of a person who has been harmed by inappropriate behavior exactly why we're not utilizing punitive consequences with the offender, and how tough this transition is for educators and schools. I taught in a school that attempted a swift implementation of restorative justice with students to replace punitive practices like detention and suspensions. In our first year, we failed dramatically. Educators didn't buy in, and neither did students. Training was insufficient, and educator frustrations grew. But in year 2, we made a critical move. We focused restorative efforts on staff alone. Every staff meeting was held in a circle. We used restorative questions to resolve staff conflicts. It was a messy year. We had a lot of hard conversations that got to the core of our why as staff members, but in the end, we saw the process worked. Once the staff believed in it, we implemented it with students with incredible success. We have to understand a couple critical things. Restorative justice is not a discipline regime. It will never give people what they want as a replacement for exclusionary discipline, but that's a good thing. We must move on from those incredibly damaging practices. But therein lies the tension you feel. We're trying to employ multiple strategies at the same time that are in fact not compatible with each other. PBIS, for example, is not compatible with restorative justice. PBIS rests on the foundation that behavior is motivated by external rewards and punishments. RJ believes behavior is motivated by relationships and belonging. Teachers will continue to be incredibly frustrated, and everyone, including students, will continue to be incredibly confused if we keep saying that we're doing both of these things simultaneously. Second, you can't use a restorative relationship that didn't exist in the first place. We cannot claim restorative justice as failing in a school that doesn't provide real time for educators to form relationships with students, for students to form relationships with each other. That means not telling teachers they should just find time to integrate social emotional learning curricula in the classes they already teach, and then making them impossible by having a teacher evaluation regime that holds teachers accountable if someone walks in the room and they're not on the right page of the scope and sequence at the exact right moment. These systems have to go hand in hand. If we exclude students from field trips or special events based on behavior, if we bar students from football games without supervision because of the actions of some students, if we keep imposing curfews and restricting where and when students can be in the city, and then we tell them to believe in restorative practices and create a sense of belonging, and we don't want to suspend and expel, they will be confused and their behavior will not improve because we're simply not being consistent or dedicated to actually making this shift away from punitive. It might sound intimidating to fully make that shift, but it can start quite small and progress quite quickly with the right building blocks. When a student behavior needed to be addressed in my class, instead of threatening a consequence or embarrassing them or giving them points on a public scoreboard like Class Dojo, I began using restorative questions. I can say more about these techniques. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will have a round of questions by members, starting with Representative Dinkins.
My first question is for anyone, and it is, what training or support do teachers need to help them respond to chronic absenteeism with empathy rather than disciplinary measures?
I'll just quickly say that I think it's a little bigger than that because as a teacher, there isn't that much I can necessarily do based on chronic absenteeism to like a student. It's usually much more like co-risk. But that being said, being able to provide ample opportunities to receive makeup work for those is, the high school, secondary level, and, having kind of plans for that, I think are necessary. I think it is a balance between having teachers kind of have to overdo on that side and still provide accountability for students, but there has to be, there is some happy there.
I'm thinking you could be
time to maybe one of the planning blocks or something to address the chronic absenteeism and develop a plan for a student who's chronically absent to make up work, because that's a whole nother job there. So
And then my follow-up question is, how do we ensure that these efforts don't to reduce absenteeism don't unintentionally lead to students feeling more policed?
leading to feeling more
Policed.
Make the school a place that they want to be. Like, it's really not. This is the question of absenteeism and truancy for me. I think also, just to go off what was said over here from Laura, it's training at this point. Like, I would say psychological training. There's a lot of I studied psychology for a long time, and that's definitely helped me as a teacher, certainly. But beyond that, definitely, there's only so many trainings you can do without literally a whole community and support network, which I know we have come back here and continue to talk about, like the importance of community support systems when it comes to not just our students, but our teachers as well, would be my answer to that. So when it comes to absenteeism and truancy, really, we need to be looking at what is it about the school environment that makes it such a place that kids so much don't want to be.
Because I've worked in schools where kids love to show up. They were running in the doors, like that's an amazing experience. But we have a problem with it. So something's wrong with our schools.
Thank you.
I'm gonna wrap this up in 20 seconds. I see I have 25. So to answer the first part of your question, I'm gonna offer a little pushback. I think that absenteeism and truancy should be an interconnected approach. I think that we ask our teachers to do enough, and oftentimes that we're asking teachers to address issues like truancy and absenteeism. It's often after the school day. So this is also another thing we're asking teachers to work for unpaid labor. That's the first thing. The second thing is I also agree with Perko. We have to allow school to be a place that we want children to be, but we also should not be criminalizing absenteeism and truancy. It's often a barrier that children are experiencing as to why they don't show up. So to often have another way to criminalize our youth, that should be a barrier that's removed. Thank you for your question. Representative Mozendar.
Hi, I wanted to thank you all for your testimony. It was really valuable to hear about your experiences firsthand. And I know as also a DC student, I've definitely witnessed these sort of resource disparities and the burdens that we're placing on our teachers to do just about everything, which is very much not within their scope and two what they have the capacity to do. And I really value everything that y'all had to say. My specific question was in terms of trauma-informed training and the leading with care approach. Are there any recommendations that anyone has specifically for either the practitioners of restorative justice and those doing any sort of measures in that sort of sense, or if the state board in general that you would like to see?
I've got a really simplistic answer to that, and it does tie back to sort of a psychology idea I'm really fond of, which is when it comes to trauma-informed training, something that really helps me is this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is just simply the idea of you cannot be your best self until every part of your environmental needs are met. And it starts at the base of the pyramid, where it's if you don't have food, shelter, a reliable place to sleep at night, you're not going to be able to make safe friendships with people because you're going to be too busy trying to find food. Okay, let's say you've got food and you've got friendships, but are you going to be able to study and do good in class? If there's still what if you can't make those friendships? Are you going to be able to be a good student? So there really is this idea, again, it comes back always to this idea of the whole person, right? So
I think also it can be very jarring for some educators that we don't get treated with the same respect that we're expected to show to our students. And I'm not talking about by students, they're young. And we expect them to have mistakes be made as we're trying to build our relationships with them and maintain them. But as adults, educators often just aren't we don't feel valued and respected in our spaces by the systems and by our own administrations. We hear words like devalue you, and then all the practices he'd speak otherwise. So I think it is often then hard for educators to constantly be asked to show grace, and I think many of them want to. I don't hear many teachers demand from me to I want more punishment to that kid. Go out and get it. But they also do struggle with I constantly have to get it. Where's the grace for me? If I show up late and I suddenly my career is in literal jeopardy because I came to work 5 minutes late, didn't impact student learning at all, and now I'm on the line for my entire career. Where's the grace, for us as well, and also dealing with a lot on our part.
Representative Chamberlain.
Good evening. Thank you guys so much for your testimony. I wanted to start by thanking Ms. Fuchs for specifically the action items at the end of your testimony. It really tickles my heart when people do that. I love a good action item, and I wholeheartedly agree with number 1. I do not think schools should be assigned a public grade. Perko, I wanted to ask if you had any action items that specifically would pertain to your testimony. I understand your testimony, and I think it was very moving, but I would like to know and I understand that it's kind of our job to figure out what to do, but if you, as an educator, have any ideas of what SBOE could do within their jurisdiction to help educators and students alike.
That's a great question, and I can't just default, and I just said, training's not good enough, so I can't just default to saying, more training. The one thing I will say, though, is again, I fall back to this idea of community and the fact that we do keep talking about the fact, one of the things that Empower Ed has been really focused on is this idea of community schools. And a lot of times where I see the stress and the anger and upset from the kids coming from is just the fact that they are leading these incredibly intense lives. Some of them are up at 4:30 in the morning trying to get to school, because, they live that far away or their parent or guardian schedules. Then after school, it's clubs, it's activities, it's sports. They have no time during the day to associate with their friends. Just all this stuff. And then late into the night, they're working they're doing the homework till late. Maybe they're working a part-time job to support their family or to go to college. So all of this together really speaks to the fact that there is community support that these kids are lacking. They shouldn't have to be doing hours of homework every night. They shouldn't have to be, working until 2 o'clock in the morning to feed their families. Of course you're going to come to school and be fighting and punching. All the kids that I would have that would come in and kind of maybe not be the most pleasant, there was always a reason for it. No student is coming into school and being I want to get up in your face. So I think what I would say with that is there's not an easy answer to that, no, but I do think it does come back to this idea of this needs to be a whole community involvement. It's not just about the teachers taking on the responsibility or even the schools taking on the responsibility. It's about us as a community understanding that, as we keep saying, we need help and these kids need help. So if you wanted to, sorry, I can keep ranting, but if you wanted to ask another question.
I don't have another question.
Scott, were you saying something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if I can add one thing to that, which is I think one of the things you can do, anyone with oversight, is to ask about the incompatibility of multiple initiatives, meaning DCPS does something like Becoming, which is incredibly important to build a sense of belonging, but then they do things that undermine that in the way they evaluate students and teachers in schools publicly, right? So I think a lot of, there was a PD, I think last year or the year before, where they had anti-racist education as a thematic topic. The speaker spoke out against standardized testing, and the next session was about increasing standardized testing. You have to look at the incompatibility of these initiatives.
Thank you. Representative Chang.
Would you remind me your name? Dominique Moore, Ms. Moore. Would you like to finish your testimony, and then I have some follow-up questions for you?
On the recommendation 6?
Yeah.
I don't remember
That's
quite right where I left off, but the gist of the thoughts and reflections on recommendation 6 is why I think the intentions are in the right way. When I read the recommendation, it lacked a lot of clarity as far as where the program could go.
If I would appreciate if you could follow up with us over text with some of the recommendations that.
Like my notes?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No.
And while we're on it, would you be willing to share any other broader feedback on the grad requirements?
Another
Broader feedback on the graduation requirements?
outside of recommendation 6?
Mm-hmm. If there's anything else that stands out to you? If there's anything else that stands out to you?
I would like to provide my notes to be able to speak accurately for the record. But I do think that as we move into a era where student learning and outcomes need to look different in order to reflect the change that our students are going through, it's a great time to look at that. But let me look at my notes and I can specifically attest to where some of those recommendations are. But as a special education teacher, recommendation 6 is the first place I would.
And since I've already put you on the spot, I would love to know what your CBO does.
What my CBO does? So I have 3 main initiatives, youth development and services. So it really came out of what I couldn't do as a teacher. I'm also in a sorority, so women empowerment is something that we are really big on, and also social justice. So anything that we seem equitable and unfit, we are really gearing to try and set the playing field even.
Okay, thank you.
But if I could state for the record, why I do think that transition services are a great way to employ and empower our special needs students to be able to move forward into the work sector or secondary post education. What we're doing for transition services now is not adequate for what we say the program does. And when I say that, IEP, special education teachers are already struggling with the proper time to implement. So, for example, the 225 minutes that general education teachers get, special education teachers are held to the same standard, and I have doubled the course load or had doubled the course load. For example, I worked in an EC last year. I taught 2 grade levels for 2 different I taught 3 grade levels for 2 different classes, so you can imagine that's
Yeah.
6 different lesson plans. And let's just say we had 3 different tiered levels of differentiation apiece. We're looking at 9 or 12 lessons. So the fidelity is just not there.
Thank you. And may I ask the team's help to follow up to get her notes?
So sorry, Representative Chang. Representative Colson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are regulars now, and thank you for your testimony. I don't have a specific question. Just want to affirm that I agree with what's said. I'm in the schools with you all, so I agree. My comment is just that what we're dealing with now is different than what we were dealing with before, and I believe that we are still looking at the aftermath of the pandemic, and then we're going through something else. And so I will be happy. I would love to follow up with you all on some other ideas on how we can support our students and families. But I would just like to say that from my lens, we're in October right now, and multiple of my students have gone to the hospital for mental health support. So across the city, our students are under a lot of stress and it's showing up in the classroom and in the schools. And we can't do this by ourselves. It has to be a multiple interdisciplinary approach, or going back to the community, as you all said. So thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Representative Goulet.
I want to thank you all for your testimony. Perko, I like that you raised the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think that is something that we face here in the city that's a challenge because, on the base level, you have students that are struggling with food insecurity and housing instability, and there's a challenge right there. I think, though, on the next level, that's where my committee is going to try to address this year. The next level is safety and health. And we heard a lot of complaints about both of those issues during the past year from parents and from educators. And, the statistic that always sticks out to me is only 31% of our students feeling safe throughout the school day. I mean, that's an alarming number and should concern us all. And I like the solutions you propose. So my committee, which I think is well placed to handle this, is going to look at both the issues of safety and supports. And I love the supports that you mentioned as a panel today, including OST. I loved hearing that. I think we need more of that. I think effective restorative practices, absolutely. And then I think intensive, I think it was Ms. Shivani, you mentioned intensive school-based mental health services, which I really support. I think we need to expand to get that one-on-one attention, or we're never going to be able to reach kids who really have profound needs. So I support really everything this panel has said. I did want to raise a question from Mr. Goldstein, though, who talked about the incompatibility of two approaches. And I would like to push back on this and then get his reaction to it. I think you can establish, and we see all the time, schools that establish a school community, a code of conduct, and create a sense of belonging with students who agree with how they're going to treat each other. And then if students violate that code of conduct through things like bullying, harassment, that there are consequences. And I don't think we're doing our students and our young people any favors by not holding them accountable for actions that later on will create issues. I don't want to see kids criminalized. I certainly don't support that. But why is there an inherent, in your mind, Mr. Goldstein, incompatibility between creating expectations versus then holding students accountable for violating those expectations?
Yeah, let me be clear. I am not against consequences for behavior or accountability for behavior. And I do not think it's incompatible to have consequences when students violate expectations that have been laid out for them. What I do think is incompatible is when kind of the systems that we set up at a school level are that we are going to create a ton of, like, everything is going to be incentive based, right? You either meet these incentives and you're rewarded for these incentives, or they're consequence based and it's all carrots and sticks. And then we say we're trying to restore. Restoration is in it of itself, it is a form of consequence, right? But the consequence is not just a punishment where you go sit in the auditorium for an hour and have to be silent, or stay after school for an hour or get suspended. The consequence is you actually have to repair the harm. And that is a harder consequence to do. So there should absolutely be consequences, but it's a matter of what kind in some ways.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Is that it, Representative Goulet? Representative Henderson.
Ms. Fuchs, you talked about the vacancies with behavior techs. In your opinion, what's the major problem there?
The low pay.
I thought you might say that. Thank you for saying it. And then what is the recourse for WTU when DCPS is in breach of arbitration? What's the next step after that?
Good question. We would hope it means that they resolve all the many, many, many cases that we've had to file over this type of violation without us forced to kind of move all of them forward through the grievance process. We're moving towards the phase where we look at the remedy. So like we kind of won on the decision and now we have to like discuss the remedy. This one's gonna be very tricky because basically they owe us for every time this has happened. And at every school, it's happened a lot and in different ways. And even like, it could be like my department didn't have to do it, but the English department did. And so like we're about to do some very complex and very expensive for DCPS mathematics. And then they're gonna pay it for it.
And who's the arbitrator? That's someone who
My DCPS and W2, I don't know the name of this particular one, but we have to mutually decide and
Got it.
we co-pay the arbitrator.
Thank you. Ms. Moore, thank you for continuing to speak to the graduation requirements. We're not done on those, so there's plenty more time for you to share that, and we are interested in hearing your thoughts both on the recommendation you spoke to and more broadly, and that goes for the broader public as well. And I guess I don't have another question, but I feel that we are asking teachers and schools to solve enormous systemic problems that you cannot solve. And until we wrap our heads and political will around that, we're going to struggle. So I hope that we will make progress on that as a city and set both you and our students up for success. Thank you for your work in spite of that.
Representative Johnson Law.
Thank you all so much for your testimony. And Kara, it's good to see you. It's always good to see one of our Ward 8 teachers. Shout out to Friendship Tech Prep and the team. Just really quickly, just kind of piggybacking off of what Representative Henderson said. The village is broken. I don't think we need to sit up here and put it any other way. The village is just absolutely broken. Teachers are exhausted. Parents are exhausted. Schools are exhausted. At this point, I don't know a person who's not, we're exhausted. I don't know a person who is not out of capacity, especially in the last, well, really since January, but sorry, y'all. That's my little joke for the day. But it just seems like we are just all, it just seems like out of capacity. And I think, again, we have to really find a interdisciplinary approach. We have to figure out transportation. The kids are zigzagging across the city. We got to help parents. We got to help teachers. We got to help schools. We got to help principals. We got to help special education teachers. There's a lot of things that are happening at the same time. And we're going to have to really wrap our heads around, you can't just throw money at the problem. How are you really, where's the money going? And how is it really solving it? And how are we making sure that the money is going exactly to where it's supposed to and that it's being implemented well? So I wanted to say that to all of you. Ms. Moore, I really wanted to thank you for speaking to the grad requirements because I've been racking my brain around how do we help our kids with disabilities? And how much time do I have? And I love what you said about it's well-intentioned, right? It's like, how do we figure out how to uplift and include this population? But we also, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to me, it sounds like, okay, we need to make sure we get this right so that we don't have unintended harm to this population. So I would love to be able to hear your notes. I have my own thoughts. I think personally we should be creating pathways to a standard diploma, not an alternate diploma where now we have a standard and alternate and a certificate that can get lost in the sauce. And so I know you were not on the committee, well, really not committee, I'm sorry, the task force, but I would love to be able to hear your thoughts. I would love to be able to follow up with you. And honestly, really just all of you, actually, just maybe we just sit down and just go through it. Like, what do you like? What do you don't like? How can we make it better? Because this is our opportunity to really get it right for our kids. And maybe it's an idea of we bake in kids with disabilities, but maybe other kids who don't have a disability need a pathway too. And so I feel like I don't really have a question. It's more just a comment of, I hear you, I feel you, and I feel like everyone's asking us to do more when we're all out of capacity. But if we have a chance to do something and reimagine, then let's really reimagine and get it done right. So actually, I'm going to probably follow up with all of you, and all of you are with Empower Ed. So I'm going to call Caroline back there to to be able to maybe to get on the call with you, and Laura, President Fuchs, I will follow up with you as well. Thank you all so much.
Representative Thompson.
Good evening. I do want to thank everyone for their testimonies. I don't have questions because it made sense. And so a question for me at this point would be insincere. I do look forward to seeing, I guess, Ms. Fuchs tomorrow as we kick off the task force. I do think it's important to make clear that that's not the only opportunity, and there will be built-in things. And as Representative Henderson said, it's not like decisions have been made. I do think, in my experience, as someone who has worked in my community and worked just in policy and city and all the things, the hardest part is what we want to imagine for ourselves, and to be able to put things on the table that maybe aren't on the table yet. And so I'm looking forward for us to do that through this process, and for us to really lean into preparing our kids, because that's what we should be doing through education. So I know you all do that every day in your own ways. I very much appreciate your testimony. I will check out the roundtable later once I get some capacity, and I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Representative Best.
All right, so I have a question for Scott, but before I do, I just want to acknowledge something that, sometimes I'm guilty of, and that I think I sometimes hear in testimonies and things of that nature. Our students aren't like their circumstances, right? And so I think that it's important that we also don't assume their circumstances. And while empathy is incredibly important, and I hope that no one ever loses that, I think sometimes when we assume their circumstances, we subconsciously place limits on them as well. And so I want to move to Scott now. Scott, I think I agree with you about 90%, with a slight wiggle room for disagreement where students are where some students respond to certain practices better than others. But if you were able to restructure the systems to be fully aligned, what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually is not just about behavior and discipline. I think alignment is about all of the things we do, taking a more human-centered approach and being about how we develop trust, right? How we develop trust between student and student, between student and teacher, between family and school, and all of those things. So I think what I would do is, first of all, I would make sure the things that we incentivize don't create perverse incentives to actually drive toxicity, right, in relationships and in schools, so that we're prioritizing relationships, that we're prioritizing trust. That might sound broad in general, but actually the work that we do every day when our school partnerships is to make that very specific. What does communication look like from a principal to a school that creates those kind of trusting relationships? What kind of containers do you create? For example, there are some schools that, because they have been behind in testing data, right, have taken away the social emotional learning blocks. And that has been direct from instructional superintendents down to the schools. You need more time for reading. That's not actually good for reading instruction. We actually need for reading instruction broad content, right? Exposure. But those are the kinds of things that we're doing that don't align, right? Which is, if we say we believe in these strategies, we have to make time for them. So I would adjust schedules to make sure we do that. I would adjust the way we communicate. I would adjust evaluation systems to make sure we do that. And then when it comes to behavior and discipline, very specifically, I don't think a lot of people know the very basic building blocks of how to do this. Like Yazid listed the restorative questions that should be used. I don't think a lot of people actually know and have been trained in just how to use those 4 questions effectively outside of your classroom. So people just need to know the very basic shifts to make, and we need to give them time to practice those things and implement them with adults and also with kids.
Quick question. Do you have some type of framework or written some of this stuff written down, or maybe we can just catch up later to discuss what that
Yeah,
can look like.
sounds good. Follow
All
up.
right, cool. Thanks.
Vice President Williams.
Yes. Thank you all for your testimony. I share your passion and interest in all of these topics. Ms. Fuchs, I have a couple technical questions for you. I appreciate you coming with some specific points around how the state board can help on these issues, and I think all of them are points that I'm happy to lend my support with. For the third one, with regards to the partnerships with DCPS, with LSAT or the SCACs, which are the school chapter advisory committees, which people from DCPS do you think would be good partners for that, and what do you think that would look like if it were to kind of move in a positive direction?
My belief is that a central office should be supporting schools, not be dictating. Right? Too often we have instructional superintendents come in with kind of the mental flipboards. I'd be like, this is what I want to check, check, check. Did I come into this classroom? Are they on scope and sequence? Check, check, check. They weren't, and now I've highlighted their school in red and sent the email out to the entire slip. That's kind of their approach to things. And I know principals don't like it, but then principals turn around and do what you get teachers. It's well, someone's going to come in and do their little checklist and send you a nasty email. So I'm going to do the same to you, make sure we all get in line. So I think instead, and with budgets, they kind of send something out and say, here's our initiative. Some of this you can't change, and you send us back with the P penny and did to decide. So I think it's just you got to flip that on its head. The schools should kind of be saying, okay, we recognize you have a chronic absenteeism problem, or we recognize our students' test score on XYZ is really low. And then actually kind of sit down and actually talk about what would it take, what do we want, and then the school district, coming through ideally with some models, so they're not just coming up with stuff by themselves. I mean, some schools might know and they know exactly what they want. Sometimes they're like, I don't know what are the options. Who read literacies and yo, I read specific. Oh, I the tutors. Oh, who this structure your schedule this way. You don't need to need more money. Just these things give people options to then actually invest in, decide on what's used, and then, of course, the funding to implement. And it could be outside organizations or whatever, but we're not really asking schools too often what they need. And even if they say, yeah, we do. Look, you have, $100,000 you can play with. If that's something by one person, so then that. So I think it's just reimagining for the district how it interacts with the schools writ large. One where they're actually listening to the school. I think these, especially LSAT's a kind of a committee, and then SCAC is, more contractual, but some of the problems are that the contract does protect on this stuff and it's just ignored.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to follow up with you on that, and I appreciate that thoughtful response.
Is President Patterson still on?
Yes, ma'am, I am. Like, ask the question.
Yes, President Patterson.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. And I don't have a question. I want to thank the panel for the discussion on the subjects that they brought up. I was going to ask a question, but I'll just follow with the young lady who talked about the funding not being properly done to the Fair Access to School Act that she stated. Well, you know what? I will ask the question to the young lady that made that statement. What do you think could be done better about that act? We've had that act now for 7 years, I believe now at this particular point. I've heard a lot of complaints about it, that it went too far. Were we to improve on some of the things, what would be some of your suggestions on improving that particular act?
Thank you. I think my main ask really is about funding. I believe it was sections 206 and 207 of that act, but I don't want to speak anything incorrect into the record. So would it be all right if I follow up in writing?
Yes, ma'am, it would be because we do want to look at that. We've heard so many complaints about it that it might have went a little bit too far. We have educators who have come to us and said, like, basically it ties their hands around a lot of things. And I understand what you're saying about the funding and actually implementing it, but at the same time, how we go through those different categories and how you can expel a student for how long, that has become a constant complaint that I get mainly from educators of what they can do to a child that has done something very egregious in their school.
Yeah, I've
So I look forward to following up.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other questions, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, panelists, for your comments this evening. We're about to call our next round of public witnesses. Zellie Jones, Devon Montgomery. Here. Alicia Halton Francis. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. No one told me that. I didn't know that was. So we have 2 people. Or 3 people. Two people. Here, one. Okay. So no Alicia Francis.
Yes, you run on the bar here.
Alicia is not online. Oh, Zellie Jones is online. Yes, Sound is in person. There's no Alicia Francis. All right. We'll start with Ms. Jones.
Good evening, council members. My name is Zellie Jones. I'm a 7th and 8th grade humanities special education teacher from Ward 4, testifying with Empower Ed. In addition to my role as a special education teacher, I'm the director of aftercare for my school, and I sit at the front desk of our Before Care program. The joy of all 3 of these responsibilities is knowing that I'm at the front line seeing my kids come to school every day, welcoming our parents, and being there when they go home. There are a myriad of reasons for the chronic absenteeism, and I am here to ask council to address absenteeism with a whole child's perspective. Absenteeism is an issue that goes beyond needing our kids in the building for test scores, data, or the biases and blame we unintentionally give the parents of our students. One of my students has 4 siblings. His mother works as an overnight shift as a corrections officer. Getting home to her kids with no additional support makes it difficult to get her kids to school by personal or public transportation. This new school year, so many of our Hispanic students are missing school due to the fear of being approached by ICE waiting outside school parameters. The 7th grader missed the first week of school due to the fear of ICE approaching and deporting the family. Under Trump's orders, absent students are at even higher risk of contact with federal law enforcement, where they are likely to experience harm and trauma. Absenteeism isn't just about students not wanting to come to school or parents not being able to bring them. Our students are facing added stressors now that our politics are affecting whether our students get to school or have a family to come home to at 4 p.m. Some strategies for reducing absenteeism are funding for viable safety plan for our students, support of students and families inside and outside school, experiential learning, community schools which provide wraparound services like food access, legal help, mentoring. These resources, when provided for, help the foster stronger relationships with our students and families, ensuring the well-being of our children. My student whose family was afraid of ICE, our teachers coordinated a way to pick them up, avoid the checkpoints to bring them to school safely. Our school is not a community school. We rely on the dedication and the compassion of our teachers to provide additional support to our students and families in need. As of February 2025, 37% of our students were chronically absent, 21% of our students were chronically truant, and 52% of high school students were chronically absent, according to the OSCE reports that's due out in November. With these statistics, the council must take action to support our schools and teachers in addressing the chronic absenteeism and provide our students with resources to extend beyond our own economic and academic means. They will ensure holistic support for our students, exciting programs that motivate them to attend classes where they feel safe, not just for our students, but for our families and teachers as well. Thank you for your time and consideration and my testimony.
Devon Montgomery.
Good evening. Good evening, State Board members. My name is Devon Montgomery, and I'm the Dean of Students and Culture at Harmony DC Public Charter School, an elementary school in Ward 5, and an Empower Ed Fellow. I'm here today to ask the board to consider the detrimental nature of criminalizing scholar behavior in schools and address school discipline by examining the needs of the whole child in the process. At this time in the district, scholar and educator wellness and safety are major priorities within our school communities. Scholar behavior in schools is information and communication around what scholars need to thrive, and as a result, should inform instructional practice and scholar supports rather than solely criminalize undesired behaviors. As a building leader that is heavily involved in disciplinary and scholar support matters, I've witnessed the benefits of a holistic approach to student support and student discipline. The classrooms in our building with the least amounts of office referrals are the classrooms where scholars are held to high expectations, are engaged in learning activities utilizing a variety of modalities. There are avenues for scholars to advocate for their needs. There are clear lines of communication open to families, and there are clear ways for scholars to give and receive feedback from adults and peers. A restorative approach to school discipline is rooted in relationship building, accountability, empathy, effective communication, and collaboration. The Student Fair Access to School Amendment Act of 2018 paved the way for DC to fully implement restorative practices in schools, but the funding wasn't adequate. OSCE was supposed to receive wide funding for all the supports needed to make that happen, but that was only partially realized. These shortfalls make implementation with fidelity extremely difficult. Scholars need access to safe, joyful spaces where they have the freedom to feel included and positively engage with peers and community members. Additionally, educators and school leaders need access to funding for adequate staffing, professional development, partnerships, and other resources to implement restorative practices. Scholar behavior is rooted in whether their basic needs are being met, and the social safety nets and behavioral health infrastructure for many of our scholars and families has been steadily deteriorating. I am asking for your support to advocate for a community schools model being implemented district-wide that would provide wraparound services like health services, food access, legal help, mentoring, and other services for scholars and families. Also, support funding for behavioral health programs, which could empower restorative justice coordinators who are often overworked, under-resourced, and in need of support staff. To recommend that safe passage workers work in tandem with the restorative practices work happening on school campuses in a more formalized manner. Using whole child approaches to scholar behavior is better for the city and our academics than increasing the school to prison pipeline at a time where the current administration is trying to jail and arrest our young people. Thank you for your time and consideration of my testimony.
Thank you. We will now move to a round of member questions, starting with Representative Mozamdar.
Hi, I wanted to thank you both for your testimony, and I truly echo everything you guys have to say about having a holistic approach to supporting students in terms of combating both truancy and addressing school discipline issues. I only have one question for Mr. Montgomery. Are there any community schools in particular you'd like us to look at as an exemplar model for what you'd like to see?
Off the top of my head, no, but I'm thinking about the Baltimore city schools in particular, thinking about their model that has more of a widespread net to kind of reimagine what our school network looks like. So thinking about not specific school, but if we think about system wide, the approach to how we educate our students, and if we approach our education in a more holistic method, then I think that that's a better model than just the specific schools per se.
Okay, thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Representative Chamberlain.
Thank you both for coming and giving your thoughts to the board. I have a question for Mr. Montgomery. I see in your action items, which I really appreciate them being there, specifically your safe passage point. I love safe passage. I'm good friends with one of the students who was a DCPS student who helped create and implement that. And I think it's a program that we can do a lot more with than we are doing. And I'd like to know what you envision making better use of our safe passage program looking like. So what type of training are you looking for them to receive? I know we had a council. There was a something going through council about getting safe passage workers more training. I'd like to know what you see as beneficial for a safe passage program to really use that best.
That's a great question, and I appreciate you posing that question. I think something that would help the safe passage workers is first having them trained in, like, obviously, like, de-escalation and conflict resolution and ways to kind of be supportive in their engagement. But I also think that bigger than just the training is that they need to be connected within the community. And I think one of the biggest hurdles has been that they are there, but there's not a real connection between them and the work happening in the school. So I think there was something put out around passage workers talking with school leaders. I think that if we're having a restorative model where this work is happening within the schools, doesn't make sense for them to not be a part of that work. If they're on a route and need to know how to engage with students, they can better be prepared to do that, not just with training, but with knowing the actual kids. And part of knowing the kids and knowing kind of what that community needs, rather than them just being from this community, is actually being within that school and within that space and knowing kind of those flex points. So I think that one big component to that needs to be their presence within whatever work is happening within the schools.
Okay, thank you. I'll give the rest of my time back. Representative Dinkins.
So thank you both for your testimonies. I do have one question, and it's for Ms. Jones. Noting that circumstance differs around different DC wards, should attendance improvement plans be tailored by ward or school type, given the different transportation realities or economic realities of the city, or how could it be ensured that the improvement plans are reflective of the circumstances within the district?
I don't want to be completely overwhelmingly reactive to it, but I think if we can kind of look at the circumstances as a whole, we're looking at high demographics of Black and Brown students. And so even though I did mention in my testimony our Hispanic students, there are also our Black students as well who may need some sort of safe passage to our schools. And what it would be best, I think, is how can we look at that as a whole, really looking at all of our students as a whole, and finding those ways that we can safely get them to and from school. Looking at restorative practices as not just an accountability, again, for our families and students, but also the teachers involved, and how we can offer our support in a more effective way to kind of rectify and remedy the absenteeism that we see, or the chronic absenteeism that we see in the DC public schools and charter schools across the state.
Thank you.
Representative Coulson.
Thank you both for your testimony. I don't have any questions. I yield my time.
Representative Goulet.
My mic on. I want to thank you both for your testimony. Let me start with you, Mr. Montgomery, and I want to use your experience working at a elementary school to guide us on an issue that's been something I've been challenged by. Is last year we had one of the Ward 3 elementary schools. We had a student in kindergarten who had profound mental health or behavioral issues in that class, and they had an aide president. The school was really doing everything it could with the IEP. But the student was still constantly assaulting other students in the classroom, like stabbing a student in the eye with a magnetile, stabbing students with pencils, hitting, striking other students, and disrupting the classroom. And students were legitimately afraid to go in the classroom. They tried to bring DCPS into this, but we ran into the barrier which appears to be, I don't think it's a real barrier, but it's a perceived one, is that if the behavior stems from the student's disability, that there's nothing that the school can do, and the school did nothing in this case. And clearly, a student who's experiencing those types of issues, you don't want to involve them in any sort of criminal process. Obviously, you want to find an academic placement that meets their needs in at least restrictive setting you can find, but mainstreaming them in a classroom was not the answer in this case. So how do we find the right balance there in addressing students who have an IEP, who really present a danger to teachers or other students, or create such a disruption to the learning environment that it really, disrupts, in some cases, an entire year of study for a class?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that because I've actually had similar situations in terms of the conflict of a student that needs support, but they're kind of experiencing violent behaviors, right? And so I think that my first thing would think about, like, what support is that student getting, and do we need to revamp that IEP process, right? So I think that it sounds as though behavior is communication, and for me in that situation, it sounded like that student needed a lot more support that wasn't in place. And so I would think about, yes, safety is a main concern, but we have to figure out a least restrictive environment for that student that could provide them with maybe more mental health support, or maybe the classroom setting itself needed to have less students in it, or other supports that needed to be in place. And so thinking about it from that approach as well, maybe that school might not have been the best fit, not in a punitive way, but just in a resource-based way, right? So maybe, because I don't know the specifics of that situation, but that's kind of how I would approach it in thinking about, if this student is unsafe within this space, there is a reason why. There might be other supports that this student needs that we can't provide. So how can we bridge that gap and find a space in a productive way, not a punitive way, that can best support that student so that they're not being a danger to themselves or to others? And it gets, in my experience, it was tricky because we didn't have the space, for example, to have a resource room or to provide that student with more mental health wellness support. And so it gets murky too when you have to have parental consent in order to have these processes go through as well. And sometimes the parents or families might not have the capacity to understand the scope of what
Thank you, sir.
was needed.
Thank you very much for the response.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you both for testifying. I have no questions.
Representative Johnson Law.
Thank you both for your testimony. I have no further questions, but just keep doing what you're doing. This is a nuanced issue because we're dealing with kids that have special needs, kids who may be suspected of a disability, and then there's a lot of trauma happening. And so unfortunately, it's causing damage within. And so we have to figure out, again, as a village, as a broken village, how do we really support? And Ms. Jones, thank you for all you do for our special needs children. Thank you both so much. No further questions.
Representative Thompson.
Good evening. I do want to thank both of you for your testimony. I'm hoping that the first one, if not delivered at the roundtable today, was at least shared with the council, because I know that's what they were addressing. And if that didn't happen, then I'm hoping we can share it with the council members. I will say I did not have the opportunity to testify earlier today, but I will say that if I had testified, I would have noted community schools as really the biggest solution that we have on the table that we consistently do not fully fund. Community schools absolutely address truancy by providing comprehensive, holistic, targeted supports to students and to families. They tackle the root causes of absenteeism rather than just the symptoms. And I am sure I would have heard testimonies from folks talking about all the different challenges that people go to get to school. Many of them we've heard over the years, and there's some new ones in this context of federalization. And so I will still submit testimony, but I do want to recognize and appreciate and continue my commitment that is a solution that we should be employing for our young people in DC. So thank you. No questions.
Representative Best.
Thank you for being on the front lines, but I have no further questions.
Representative Chang.
Also, no further questions. Thank you.
Representative Colson. Vice President Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery and Ms. Jones. Mr. Montgomery, you had mentioned a variety of issues with regards to like resources and funding and stuff. And Ms. Jones also posed this question to you quickly. Like this year, in particular, I imagine I don't imagine we're in a different financial position than we were previously. So if you were to kind of fund one particular thing that you think is critical for the goals and needs that you mentioned, what would it be and why?
Behavioral health support. I think that having people in the building that can support with building the capacity to support mental health and wellness for our students is we get our biggest bang for the buck. Because I think if we think about helping students develop the tools to cope and the tools to regulate, that is where the biggest bang for our buck would be. So I think getting more behavior support into behavioral kind of health support.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, same question to you. She's still there. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Director Butler, I yield the rest of my time. Moving on. Okay. Thank you. This concludes our time with public comment. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I want to thank all of our public witnesses for their comments tonight. We sincerely appreciate it. Our meeting will now proceed with the administrative items for vote. SR 25-12, calling for an establishment of Civic Learning Week in DC schools. We will move to vote on this. Is there a motion to adopt SR 25/12?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made. A second has been made. Director Butler, will you
Mr. Vice President, may I move at this time to waive the reading of the resolution, please?
Yes, the chair recognizes that motion. Is there a second?
I second.
The motion has been properly moved and second. Is there any discussion on this motion?
And this is the motion to waive.
The motion to waive the motion to waive the reading. Exactly. Okay. Seeing that there is no discussion, we'll now vote. All in favor of.
No.
Oh, I need to first go there. Thank you, students and Director.
Will we waive the reading and the SAC comment?
The Student Advisory Committee, SAC, lends its strong support to SR 2512. The SAC recognizes the importance of civics learning for young people and suggests the creation of a bank of civic-centered activities, including involvement of the DC Public Library System in the implementation of SR 2512 in order to alleviate pressure on educators to create Civic Learning Week (CLW) activities. The SAC also recommends the opportunity for students to gain community service hours, and the implementation of a student representative system, at least one per school, in order to encourage greater student leadership and involvement. Finally, the SAC recommends the creation of an evaluative system, such as a survey, in order to gauge effectiveness of the Civics Learning Week in schools and tailor Civics Learning Week activities year by year to maximize engagement and learning. The final vote was 52 in favor, 0 opposed, and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now proceed with the motion to adopt SR 2512. Is there any discussion on the resolution?
Mr. President, Vice President, I think we need to just have the vote on the voice vote on the.
Yeah, that's what I
motion.
thought. Kind of came out of
And
order.
then
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so we will now vote on the voice vote to waive the reading of reading the resolution. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, no. Okay, the ayes have it. Um, so we'll now proceed with the motion to adopt this. Is there any discussion on the resolution?
Yeah, I'll start.
Recognizing Representative Best.
Yeah, so I want to just first say thank you all for the work that's gone into this. I think we live in a very unique space here in DC where understanding civics is incredibly important, especially seeing what's going on right now. I would like to thank Henry Marks, who is a former DCPS student who actually came up with this idea. And so I often think some of the best ideas that we have don't necessarily come from us. So the fact that this came from a DCPS graduate, I think should be applauded. And so I just want to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Best. Is there any other discussion? Yeah, Representative Johnson Law.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just want to thank Representative Best for this resolution, and I'm thinking about our kids that we took to the Capitol for recess at the Capitol, and them really understanding the uniques of government, how we work locally, how we are federally. Is just hyper important right now. And so I'm really excited to vote yes on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, I'd like to briefly say something. So, I also want to thank a variety of people. So, Representative Best, thank you for your leadership on this. Not just as Ward 1 representative, but as a social studies teacher. This is so critical. I've invested so much time throughout my career in encouraging active participation in government, in community, in so many things. And when Representative Goulet and I presented this to the Student Advisory Committee, there was unanimous support. So it was a beautiful thing. Representative Johnson Law, seeing how you're kind of taking the moment with this kind of the spirit of this resolution and enacting it with recess at the Capitol is wonderful to see as well. I think we do need to think about what kind of community partnerships we build to make sure that the implementation for this goes well, and that this is not the finish line, but that it is a really important step to making sure that we have better curriculum and something to celebrate and implement that also has, broader national civics learning week and is connected with a broader picture in the spring. So I look forward to supporting this as well. All right, thank you all. Seeing no further discussion, the motion is to adopt SR 25-12. Director Butler, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chamberlain.
Present. Every time I remember this is recorded, it just gets better. Yes.
Representative Dinkins.
Aye.
Representative Mozendar.
Aye.
Representative Best.
Aye.
Representative Chang.
Aye.
Representative Colson.
Aye.
Representative Goulet.
Aye.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Johnson Law.
Aye.
Representative Thompson.
Aye.
Vice President Williams.
Aye.
President Patterson. SR 25-12, calling for the establishment of a civics learning week, has passed.
Thank you, Director Butler. Next, we'll move to vote on SR 25-13, establishing membership of the High School Graduation Requirements Task Force. Is there a motion to adopt SR 25-13?
So moved.
Thank you, Representative Colson. Is there a second?
Second. That was Thompson.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Representative Thompson.
And I second.
And thank you, Representative Henderson. The motion has been properly moved and seconded.
Mr. Vice President,
The chair recognizes Representative Goulet.
may I move at this time a motion to waive the reading of SR 25-13?
Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? All right. All in favor to move the reading of the resolution for the High School Graduation Requirement Task Force for the ayes?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. The ayes have it. Is there a student statement on this? No. Okay. So the motion has been properly moved and seconded and passed. Director Butler, will you please move the read the resolution. Oh, we don't need to do that part anymore. Is there any discussion on this motion? The chair will recognizes Representative Thompson.
Okay. I want to thank my colleagues for their thoughtful consideration, and I don't think it's presumptuous to say support of this resolution. I am so excited that we are establishing a task force for this work, because this work is our one of our biggest responsibilities. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever received actually came from my high school counselor, and she told me that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Our job as a board is to make sure every young person in the city learns the things they need to be prepared. And that is what our school should set us up, what our school should set them up to do. If we can get this right, then our kids can be the luckiest in the world, because we have an immense amount of opportunities in DC. I believe this task force is an important step towards that vision, especially because it brings together diverse perspectives, educators, parents, students, recent grads, higher education folks, workforce experts, both charter and traditional school leaders, special education folks, all with the focus on meaningful pathways to graduation. I make no apologies about the fact that I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian. The reason I can sit here and say that is because I was prepared to sit in this chair today. And I think it is very much our responsibility to make sure that I'm not the last person who can say that we will continue to have fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth generations of Washingtonians. So I am very much appreciative to this board for the work we're about to do. I always want to remind my community that representative is both my title and my job description. And I mean that, and I'm saying that because we're going to make these decisions together. So I do thank the board for the work and the thoughtfulness that's been put in so far. I am thanking you in advance for the work that we will continue to do. And I look forward to voting to make this task force a reality.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Is there further discussion? Yes, Representative Harrison.
Yeah, I would just quickly like to add my thanks to the people who applied and who were selected to serve on this task force. I appreciate their willingness to do so, not only to provide their own feedback, but also to be a link between us and the broader public to make sure that we get very wide and diverse input on this.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. I'd like to briefly say something. So, first, Representative Thompson, I want to thank you. I think when you had first proposed this idea of a graduation task force, I did not see the immense value and was also just kind of confused on like the timeline of things with Aussie and how we would work together. And now sitting here, in October, I think this is absolutely the right decision. And appreciate that we have the opportunity to really leverage so much expertise in our community to weigh in on this decision. So thank you for your leadership in that proposition and for seeing this through. And then I just want to thank the committee as well, Representative Henderson, Representative Johnson Law, for scoring these, for making sure that we get a really diverse and experienced group, and Representative Best as well. That was not an intentional slight, to be able to make these the best that we can for all of our students. All right. Any final discussion? All right. So seeing no further discussion, the motion is to adopt SR 2513. Director Butler, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chamberlain.
Aye.
Representative Dinkins.
Aye.
Representative Mozendar.
Aye.
Representative Best.
Aye.
Representative Chang.
Aye.
Representative Colson.
Aye.
Representative Goulet. Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Johnson Law.
Aye.
Representative Thompson.
Aye.
Representative Vice President Williams.
Aye.
SR 25-13, establishing membership for the high school graduation requirements task force has passed.
Thank you very much. I will now entertain a motion to approve CR 25-8, excuse me, honoring the late Alberta Paul.
So moved.
It has been moved by Representative Thompson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been moved and seconded
Who was the second?
by Representative Johnson Law. Having been properly moved and seconded, the motion to approve CR 25-8 is now open for discussion. Is there any discussion?
I'm actually okay with us waiving the reading. I don't think we have to read ceremonial resolutions, and I don't think we have to vote to waive the reading. I just want to make that procedurally clear, because sometimes we do it to be nice. Ms. Paul's services were actually this past Saturday, and we also had another community convening, I would say, for her last night. She is someone who I'm appreciative to have known, and I'm really appreciative to the board for posthumously honoring her. And we will make sure to get the printed, signed, very nice version to her family. I will note that I think it was close to 20 years since Paul worked at DDOT. Many of the DDOT folks were present at the services, including the current director and the two previous directors, who all confirmed that they actually work for Ms. Paul and not the other way around. And she just was a wonderful person who knew the pulse of our community and the pulse of our streets. When we got the suspected proposal from WMATA about the budget cuts last year, Ms. Paul was the person I called and said, hey, am I imagining things? Or is this going to be really bad for our Ward 7 students? And she explained right away exactly which routes were being impacted, which school communities, this would affect, how much, the dollars didn't make sense. And so while she was a Penn Branch resident and she sent her Penn Branch, she absolutely always made sure that our Ward 7 community was represented as far as transportation equity issues. She connected neighbors. She advocated for fairness. And her work just kind of reverberated throughout the city. And so I very much appreciate the board making it official in their honor of Ms. Paul. And I think it's important that, we remember the people who work hard every day to make our communities better. So thank you all for that. And I will make sure this is delivered to the family.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Is there any additional discussion? All right. Seeing no further discussion, the motion is to adopt CR 25-8. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Members, are there any announcements or comments you would like to make before we adjourn? Representative Henderson.
Just to reiterate that the first meeting of the Graduation Requirements Task Force will be tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and it is available to the public to view via Zoom. If you find the meeting notice, you can find the Zoom link there.
Thank you. Representative Thompson.
Okay, it's almost Halloween. So it is time for our third annual trunk or treat. We will be at lot 6 of RFK this year. If you're like, why are you speaking to me in parking lots? It's because that's how they speak. What does it mean? It means you can come find us at Benning Road and Oklahoma Avenue, where the farmers market used to be. It is a free event. It is open to everyone. Kimba and I did order our costumes yesterday, so we will be matching yet again this year. If you would like to bring kiddos, you can go to my social media to sign up. You can also just show up, but we like to, get a count, buy enough candy, all the things. And if folks would like to volunteer and decorate their vehicles, we always are accepting more trunks for the trunks to treat out of. So please, think about having a good time. It will be on Halloween, and that is from 6 to 8 p.m. I think we're up to about 500 kids this year. So I want to thank Events CC for the space, CFSA and East River for continuing to do this, and MPD because we're trying to make sure our kids are safe and can enjoy their holidays, even in a time where things maybe aren't the most enjoyable. So consider supporting coming out and enjoying your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Any other additional comments or announcements? All right, I have one quick one as well. Our wonderful Deputy Director, Jen Briones, has an email for us in which we should look at to get back to her around what council hearings we want to give testimony on. So please respond via email by the end of the week so that we can look at the leadership meeting early next week about making a decision and making sure we have preparation. There are some important committee hearings in October, particularly the 29th on academic achievement, and then also some others throughout the end of the school year. So we would like to have board buy-in on those decisions. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say end of the calendar year. Yeah, but there are some that go into January as well. So just want to make sure we're prepared with and have input from all members. With no further business before the state board, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn has been made by Representative Johnson Law. Is there a second?
Second.
I heard Representative Thompson as the second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. And this meeting, public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is adjourned at 8:39 p.m.